Good evening, everybody. Can I welcome you to the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting? I'm going to introduce the committee members first, if I may. I'll get you to introduce yourselves. Remember to hold the button down and wait a second or two so the camera finds you. Oh, before that, any phones you've got on you, can you turn them off? That sort of thing. Thank you. So, can I get Councillor Bennett to say she's here? Councillor Bennett?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Bick?
I'm here.
Councillor Payne?
I think she's running late, Joe.
Yeah. Councillor Scott sends her apologies. Councillor Smart?
Present.
Councillor Smith? Simon Smith, that is.
Which one?
Simon Smith.
Present.
And Councillor Sweeney.
Present.
We also have two executive councillors. Councillor Herbert. Sorry.
A member of the committee, I'm also present.
Apologies. We also have Councillor Davey.
Present.
And Councillor Smith.
Present.
Thank you. So many of the other officers are in the chamber and some of them are online, so we'll get everybody to introduce themselves as we come to them, I think. Done the phones. Yeah, so just to remind you, everything you've got on your laptop may be seen through the public, which is now in a live broadcast. Okay. Now, the order of things, I was just going to take the order generally as it's been revised, but we'll carry on as we are at the moment. Any apologies for absence? I don't think there are now, apart from Councillor Scott.
Yeah.
Declarations of interest, any declarations now or when you come to the item if you want to delay it till then? Anything now? No? Okay. Minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 11th of July. Can I take those as an accurate record? Are you satisfied with that? No dissent? Okay. I will sign them accordingly then. Now, item 4, public questions. I believe we have one, but it's related to a later item, and the person is not here anyway.
That's correct.
So the committee clerk will read it out in due course when that item comes up. It's the one about the office buildings, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. Item 5, to note the record of urgent decision regarding the council's gas supplies. Any questions on this, or is it just for note?
It's a note.
It's a note, okay.
Councillor Bennett, Chair.
Councillor Bennett, do you want to say something?
Yes, Chair. I'd like to follow up on your excellent question at the bottom of page 22, which is, does the supply include heating our swimming pools? And the officer's answer is no, it doesn't, and that there would be a 40% saving if we had ground source heat pumps. Under the East Barnwell project, we will hopefully be digging up Abbey Pools car park in 2024, which would seem like an excellent opportunity for ground source heat pumps. Can this be considered and can this be factored into the timetable for the East Barnwell project, which is quite a complex one? Thank you.
I think your point will be noted and we'll come back to it in due course.
Thank you.
Okay, so item 5 is noted, 5A is noted. Item 6, council tax reduction local scheme is one I would like to take next before the ones that were reshuffled. So we have our officer Naomi to be able to introduce this item, I believe. Is she available?
Yes, I am.
Would you like to introduce yourself and say what your job is and tell us all about the job, the matter at hand?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Naomi Armstrong, I'm the Benefit Manager within Revenues and Benefits. The report that I'm bringing to you now is the report post the consultation. I bought the original report on the 11th of July, and since then we've been out to consultation, and we have notified all council tax reduction recipients of the consultation. We notified our precepting authorities of the consultation. We randomly selected 500 council taxpayers and invited them to comment. And we also went to Financial Capability Forum and peer groups as well to get their comments. The consultation ended in September, the end of September, and we had 56 responses, which does seem very, very low, but it's comparable to when we did this 3 years ago and for other colleague authorities that are doing similar exercises across the country. I think looking at the responses which are included in the annex, I think broadly speaking, everyone was on board with what we're attempting to do. We're continuing with 2 schemes for working age. We're unable to change the scheme for pensioners, but the 2 working age schemes are split to those that are on universal credit and those that are on legacy benefits. The reason is that to have a single scheme disadvantages one of those groups, makes it very difficult. So there aren't any changes to the original proposal in July. So the recommendations are to continue with the council tax reduction scheme, to increase with housing benefit rates, which are yet to be announced. So we're waiting for government to tell us whether they'll be using CPI or a different amount, to reset the non-dependent deduction rates for both working age schemes for 1 year, and then to revert to CPI figures thereafter. To continue with the earnings-based council tax reduction scheme for universal credit claimants, to reset the bands and the income levels for 1 year and then to uprate by CPI thereafter. There was a small anomaly when we first set out the universal credit council tax reduction scheme in that the non-dependent deductions for pensioners were different to the other 2 schemes. They're now going to be aligned, and to not bring in a minimum contribution level within any of our council tax reduction schemes. This does protect the most financially vulnerable. There are many councils that do have anything from about 8.5% to 50% contribution levels. But collecting, certainly in this current financial environment, is going to be extremely difficult. So they're the recommendations as set out, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And any questions? Councillor Vick.
Chair, just to say that I support the recommendations. I supported them going out to consultation. I don't think they've changed at all. So obviously it's with pleasure that we're able to continue with what is such a relatively generous council tax reduction scheme, and one which I think protects the scheme as it was when we were running the council. The one footnote I wanted to make was about the consultation. I don't think this changes a thing about the recommendations, but I hadn't appreciated that we were sort of targeting people for responses in the way that was described. But if you actually read the comments coming back, an awful lot of people didn't seem to really understand the questions. And I think if we do target the consultation in the way that has been done, which is perfectly sensible, good idea, perhaps we could make more of an effort to make sure that the questions are framed in a way that they get meaningful responses, because quite a high proportion of them are people saying they didn't understand the question or there wasn't enough information. And that's not ideal, but as I say, I don't think that changes anything about the recommendations.
Yeah, can I come back on that, please? I do accept your comments wholeheartedly. I think there are some quite complex questions within that. The consultation process this year was slightly different from 3 years ago because we were using different software. And I think that there was an unfortunate split between the backing documentation and the questions that hopefully in 3 years' time we will have sorted out, and it would be a much smoother process. But yes, I do take that on board. But we didn't have very many people commenting anyway, which it does mean that the don't knows do seem to be quite high.
Thank you. More questions? Comments? Oh, Councillor Bennett.
Sidelined to my day job advising on universal credit, and as far as I'm concerned, 56 responses is quite good. I've never had a client who's actually understood universal credit, and I think it's inherent in the poor system design rather than the questionnaire design. I sort of wholeheartedly recommend this scheme, which seems well thought out and compassionate, and clearly involves a lot of hard work from you, Officer Armstrong.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Right, any further questions? I must say, it's great to have a scheme like this available for the people of Cambridge. I just hope that it goes far enough, given the potential problems that many of them will face. Okay, so can we move to recommendations, which are to continue the scheme, basically, with all the specific criteria as set out. Can I see all those in favour, please, show?
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you, Naomi, for you and your staff's contribution to all this. You're welcome. Your help.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
Everybody.
Councillor Davey, do you wish to accept this recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you. Naomi. Right, we're going to carry on with items 12 and 13, which I think you know we're bringing forward. They're the decisions for the leader, combined authority update and the corporate enforcement policy. The council tax, sorry, the combined authority update, who's proposing this?
It's Councillor Herbert.
You can do it yourself, okay. Councillor Herbert, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you. And thank you to Andrew Lim for compiling these minutes. There wasn't actually a 21st of September combined authority meeting, but there was a meeting then of leaders and the mayor. I think I'll just cover 4 points briefly, Chair. The first point is that the combined authority was able to make a very good appointment in its interim chief executive, Gordon Mitchell, and he has been doing a very good job working with councillors and the whole team. The combined authority now has got an office space, which I think is really important, and that's part of Pathfinder House at Huntingdon. So it's working on an improvement plan, basically seeking government's endorsement that it's sorted out some of its issues. So there's a number of further reports and progress to be made. And part of that is to appoint 3 full-time directors. So it's been short of senior management through the last 3 to 6 months, and that's really important. It's still got a significant role to play. Some of its problems were shown up, but they weren't alone to this combined authority in not being able to spend LAD 2, which is really sad given the importance of to address energy efficiency of homes. So that was one of the reports that's referenced here. Of immediate significance is the issues of bus funding, Chair, consequent on Stagecoach listing, I think, over 15 routes, which they call red routes, which effectively will be terminated by Stagecoach from the end of this month. The combined authorities had a significant tendering exercise. I don't know the full details because the tenders only came back last Thursday, but there should be news on those publicly shared later this week ahead of a full combined authority board the following Wednesday, the 19th. So the aim is to seek to protect those routes and by seeing what we've got offered, but I can't predict what those offers are. Effectively, the combined authorities only had piecemeal funding continued by government, as Cambridgeshire, along with Suffolk and a number of areas, missed out on ongoing funding because the government saw fit to only award it to about 40% of the areas of the country. So we're starting out with a very challenging funding position, but I'm assured that the combined authority can put together a package that would see these routes continued. Now, Stagecoach also identify a number of other routes, which they called amber routes, with the prospect that some of those would be severely cut back. They don't need regulatory notification to reduce service levels, and so we are concerned about those, as well as the fact that students at the sixth form and regional colleges, as well as people wanting to get into Cambridge to work or get out of Cambridge to work in market towns, given the closure of routes to Newmarket and Ely, are going to be dependent on what we may be able to put together, assuming we've got operators wanting to do that. So bus services are definitely at the centre of attention, along with the need for the combined authority to identify an ongoing form of revenue support. And there are some options there, but they're quite limited. The combined authority has always been starved of revenue funding, but has, I think rightly, not sought extra business rates or so on. So that's the core issue at the moment. I'll obviously point people to the combined authority board papers when they're published later this week. Thank you, Chair.
Questions or comments? Councillor Vick?
I'd just like to follow on from from what Councillor Herbert was talking about there on the buses agenda. Is there any news of the combined authority adopting franchising powers? I understand that's obviously not going to solve the problem at the end of October with the bus services that are going to be withdrawn, but there is widespread interest, I think, in whether that power is going to be adopted by the combined authority, and I think a lot of people think it should be. And just completely separate, but I confess a little confusion. Who is our representative on the combined authority board? Is that Councillor Herbert or is that Councillor Smith? I'm unaware.
I continue to be the representative, and I'm also deputy mayor at the moment. And at the moment, Councillor Davey is my sort of alternate, but I think there will come a time when my role will phase out. But I think it's certainly been helped by some of what I've needed to do on some of the employment issues and a number of other things just have been helped by the fact that I get on with the people that are there. And so it's really just been an interim role to just assist things. There are still a few uncertainties around, but I do think that the combined authority's got in a stronger position, not so much my efforts, but the efforts of the officers. In terms of franchising, I take Councillor Bick's point. I think particularly the scale of intervention that the Greater Cambridge Partnership seeks relies on there being choice of different operators and an ability to get the right deal. Stagecoach, by their actions and their claims that they consulted, which is a bit deceptive because I and others weren't consulted, and councillors generally weren't told what was going to happen. Now a German-owned company, and whilst I hope that they continue to provide good bus services, and generally in the city, despite all the pressures and lack of drivers that they're able to recruit, we still have a better service than rural areas. It's not perfect by any means, given the buses that get cancelled. But yes, franchising is still the Mayor's priority, and the Mayor is committed to working with the GCP ahead of that. And clearly, if as is proposed, and rightly, we need to tackle peak time congestion and improve bus services, the only real deal that can be struck is if there's leverage on the operators. And Stagecoach, in my judgment, effectively have gone away from their previous sort of, we will support some loss-making services with the profit-making services, and a bit like what's happened on the railways with people like Avanti, they're just focusing on profit-making services. So I think what we've been seeing, albeit that we've had a lot lower usage of buses since COVID, is just not really anything close to anything like partnership. So I think franchising gives the opportunity of negotiation, but also a partnership, and the need in part to have a second provider, because there's no way you can negotiate in the current environment without franchising, and preferably without a second provider. So that work is ongoing on that, and the Mayor could be invited by the GCP to make that position publicly clear.
Thank you, Chair. Is it realistic, do you think, to move to franchising in under 18 months?
That's a good question, and obviously that may influence parts of the negotiation. I think it's certainly possible within 2 years, but the work would need to be advanced, and it needs to be clear from the GCP, amongst others, exactly what they expect the combined authority to do.
Thank you. I have another bus question. Every time I've had a meeting with Stagecoach, they have lamented their lack of access to passenger information, which they don't get. And at other times they said that the only good data they have is from passengers using their app. Given this, are we happy that they've actually made decisions on the correct financial basis and have processed the pass information? Because if they're not getting information on school passes and they're cancelling school routes because they're not showing up as having revenue, that's a great concern to me.
I think you're ahead of me there, Councillor Bennett, but if you want to just drop me a line, then I'm very happy to get a proper answer. I've got no more reassurance about the very detailed numbers that Stagecoach came back with on particular routes. And Stagecoach are also in receipt and have since the lockdown period and COVID of a large and chunky amount of funding for over 65 bus usage, which is being kept roughly at the level of during COVID. So there's definitely a need to look at that. And I know also that the County Council will be looking at are there areas of overlap between what school transport they fund and the other routes. And I think there is some room for some efficiencies there in terms of we want people, school children and students, to be able to travel with safety, but is there some room to combine some of the services to make sure that there's the best use is made of all of the opportunities to fund?
Thank you.
Any further questions from anybody? Okay, well, this report is to note, so I think we don't need to vote or anything, so move straight on. Item 13.
Councillor
Now I have-
Robertson, could I just say a couple of words before, as part of the note? Okay. From up
yes,
here.
sorry.
It was really two lots of thanks, one of which was I wanted to note my thanks to the work the Mayor Nick Johnson has done so quickly to respond to some of those worst cuts in the suggestions he's made of trying to step in on some of those services. My other one was to give some thanks to Councillor Herbert. Our intention was that we would do a transition on the Combined Authority Board in May, but clearly it was very sensible for there to be continuity at that point, and I'm very grateful to Councillor Herbert for agreeing to stay on for now several months to help provide that continuity, and I'm sure that we would all wish to have that noted.
Thank you. Okay. Now, the next item, corporate enforcement policy. I have a potential interest in this, a personal interest, so I'm going to vacate the chair and let Simon Smith take over either from there or from here.
So we now turn to agenda item 13, review of corporate enforcement policy. This item has not been requested for pre-scrutiny and therefore it goes straight to the Leader of the Council for approval. Does the Leader of the Council approve the recommendation?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of the Council. We now return to Councillor Roberts.
Right, now come on to the finance reports, but unfortunately Caroline Reber is stuck in traffic and hasn't got here. So I think we better jump to...
She's online.
Oh, she's online now. I misunderstood, okay.
I'm not sure, we can ask, but I think she might not still be here, isn't it?
Oh, she may not. Caroline, are you there?
I am, but I have literally only just got home and I'm logging in my home office. I'd appreciate it if you could give me 5 minutes just to set up. Could you take another item perhaps in the interim?
We certainly
my
can.
apologies for getting caught in horrendous traffic out there tonight.
We certainly can, but have a respite for a bit. So we'll go on to item 9, if we may, which is on the direction of the future council and organisational design. So can we move to that? That's page 119. And that's going to be introduced by Nick. Thank you very much. Would you introduce yourself and the document?
Hello, I'm Nick Kemp. Do you need both these on? Getting some feedback. Okay. I'm the Director of Transformation at Cambridge.
Sorry to interrupt, Nick. I think Caroline might want to turn her camera off while she's fiddling around on.
And I'd also like to introduce Tori Campbell, who's the Head of Transformation. So together we've produced this report. Essentially, what this report is it's a first review of where we are with the organisation design for the future council. Bear with me a minute, where I'll just find the paperwork. Thank you for your patience. So what we've done at this stage is we've established the direction of travel for the future council, the way that the organisation is going to be structured, and we are seeking your agreement today for agreement to our proposals for the direction of travel for the new design and the savings which we anticipate to make as defined so far. At this stage, the structure of the paper identifies 3 areas where we are seeking to make changes to the way the council operates. One is in the way that we're delivering services. We want to bring like services closer together. We want to find opportunities for us to generate some income and also to reduce our costs through efficiency savings through creating economies of scale. We're looking for opportunities to improve leadership and decision making through both better data and information upon which we can make decisions and through improving the way that organisational governance works. And we're also looking for opportunities for us to save money through investing better in our accommodation, our digital and our people infrastructures going forward. As I mentioned earlier on, this is very much an early first step in our organisation design. We're part way through this period, but we wanted to get your review of the direction that we're taking and your approval to what we're planning to do. So that is our ask today, and your approval also that we continue to develop along the lines that are set out in this report. We'd also like you to note the programme timetable, which we've got in section 8, which gives you an outline of how quickly we are seeking to deliver the changes which are outlined here.
Questions from anybody? Councillor Vick?
Could I ask a couple of questions in relation to the service delivery section, please? So I see the 5-petaled description of how services would be clustered for organisational purposes, and I just wondered whether you had, along the way, also considered an area-based model sitting, and what your conclusions were about that, which caused you not to pursue it. Secondly, there is reference made in the text to the city operations cluster, which is described as, so far as residents are concerned, one of the most noticeable aspects of the change that you're envisaging. So I'm afraid I've been on the council long enough to know that a long time ago, the council had something, an organisational construct that looked a bit like that, called city services. And I understand that there may be no ultimate truth in these clusterings, and that the process of an arc of change makes it just beneficial to throw the pieces up in the air and land them somewhere different. But have you looked at what existed before when we had that sort of structure, and what it was about it that caused us to move on from it? Because it would obviously be nice if we were not simply returning to where we were before, but just learning something from what did happen there. And then a bit about the text on page 124, the bullet that's right at the top of that page, dedicated and cohesive support services, etc. It wasn't clear to me what aspect of the 5 petals that was being referred to there. I suspect it was really obvious to the person who wrote that, but I was a bit confused which petal I should be thinking of when I read that bullet point. Answer those.
Take the first one, and could you take the piece on city operations, Tori, and then I'll come into the last one if you like, and answer the one about the first bullet point on the top of page 124. Yeah, when we were looking at the petal diagram, which seems to be the phrase the name which is fundamentally being called, What we were looking at, as much as anything else, are those areas of the council where there is common outcome. So we did look at an area-based model, but this is fundamentally just for us to identify the things that the council needs to do, not how we're going to do them. So the final operating design will look different to this, but this is just a way of us beginning to identify the key activities that the council needs to deliver. So that was if that helps with the first answer. I'll pass across to Tori.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it came up when we were doing the consultation around this paper, was exactly city services and how is it different. At this stage of things, I can't tell you that because we haven't done the piece of work, but what we're building into the next stage, which is looking at, should we be doing city operations, what would it look like, is building in the lessons learned around what city services is and being able to answer that question for you as to what is fundamentally different and why, how can we learn the lessons about why it was taken away so that we don't have to redo this again and go back to the different way of working in 5 years' time and then back to this in 10 years' time. So we will be building that into the operating design.
Seamlessly across to the third question you had about the bullet point at the top of page 124. That relates principally to the communities, the blue circle in the diagram. What we've been trying to do is to identify within each of these circles a key area of the council services and where it best lands. So by looking at a communities area, similar actually to many of the services that we want at the moment, we want to be able to bring through our services so that we can centre our services to communities and to residents around the needs of those particular local residents rather than have them spread across different functional areas. So this is about bringing us together so we can answer multiple questions in one pitch as opposed to people having to go to several people to get answers to their complex problems.
Maybe you wish to make another contribution?
Yeah, if I can at this stage, although I suspect I might come back later, Councillor Robertson. It's in reference to Tim's comment around place versus, if you like, type of work, for want of a better. There invariably is going to be some sort of crossover at some stage. The question is how. I think at this time, Nick and the team are looking at trying to pull together the operational activities and then look what can be done on a place-based activity. The key bit, I think, for me, is to perhaps mention that in the timetable, you'll see that there's a proposal that the senior management, operating design and political governance will be done by March next year. So the decision-making around how that place versus operations work takes place will have to be done quite quickly, because clearly in the financial constraints we have within the organisation, we're going to have to make a move on that in due course. So we'll bring back, subject to obviously S&R approving tonight, we'll bring back further indications as to how the service design will be.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple of queries. First one is about timetable. Are we confident that we can adhere to the timetable, given the severity of the financial position and inflation in our costs, or will it require acceleration? And that's really, I think, a question for Mike rather than Nick.
We have no choice, Councillor Bennett. We have to ensure that we meet the targets required. Already, as you can probably imagine, there's some concerns about the actual savings that were identified from Cambridge, because I think we're going to need and require more. So, again, it's quite likely, I suspect, that we'll have to accelerate the programme and certainly look at the pressures that or stress that has to be done in conjunction with yourselves, the opposition, because this is about how the future council works. So that's the reassurance, and I'm happy to take challenge on that, but we may well have to accelerate. Thank you, Richard.
In which case, on that basis, should we schedule some meetings in, perhaps quarterly?
Sorry, Chair. I was getting into a conversation rather than ignoring the formalities. I think that would be a wise move, Councillor Bennett, although obviously I'd want to take some advice from my leader upstairs. But I think to have quarterly meetings across the leaders of the groups would be wise. Thank you, sir.
I'm permitted, I do have one question for Nick and Tori, which relates to page 127, section 6.3, digital, outline and benefits. Disabled resident welcomes any increase in digital facilities, but I'm aware that that's not how many disabled residents feel. And if we are to have more web forms, have more digital access, it becomes more and more important to ensure we have advocate access for our disabled residents, which is where they have a carer, a social prescriber, a personal assistant, or an attorney helping them with their administration to their council accounts. Now, I've commented on that in other places, so I won't say anything more, but I just want to flag that. Thank you.
Noted, thank you. Councillor Smith?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Given the comments about the need to accelerate the programme for the delivery of the savings, can we be assured that the Council has enough resources and capacities and a sufficiently robust government regime in place to secure delivery of the savings?
Thank you, Councillor Smith, and thanks for the question. It's an important one. Bearing in mind that this time last year, the MTFS, we allocated £3.1 million to the transformation programme. I'd be loath to allocate any more because we're in a sort of catch-22, because the more we allocate to the transformation programme means the less we have for services. I'd like to see more clearly what's been delivered and the proposals around savings, and that might be something that could come back to a later SNR meeting, if that's something that Tory could note and bring back accordingly. So there's a continual upgrade on budget, but you'll understand my caution, Simon, because clearly if we take money from other resources, we won't be able to use them to deliver services. So there is a clear balance to be made out. Thank you, Chair.
Well, I take that as being, yes, we do have sufficient resources in place to deliver the programme. If we look at the papers coming up on the agenda, you see there was another 5.47 million to be saved in net saving requirements across the general fund. What measures have been taken to start to addressing that net saving requirement beyond the 3.85 million that's planned to be saved?
That sounds more like a question for me rather than for Nick and Tory. Usually that would be addressed to the BSR process, Councillor Smith, and as that process has just started, I suspect my advice would be we look at the detailed proposals that come from officers relating to those savings. If I can just come back on one comment you made, that there is sufficient resource. I think what I was saying is slightly different, i.e. the transformation team have got the resource they've been given, which may or may not be sufficient resource. Thank you.
Councillor Baker, you wanted to come back here.
Yes, Chair, I had another slug of questions, if I may. So I'll try and dump them all straight down at one time, if that's okay. Yes, so a bit like Councillor Bennett, I was wondering about the where the process goes from here and our part in that, and in particular in relation to the leadership and decision-making component of the programme. The reference is made there to the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny report, and that deals substantially with our role, the way the democratic element engages with the rest of the organisation. And I don't think, although we've obviously got that report, I'm not sure we've been through any process yet of developing a consensus on it. And that is probably quite a significant piece of work because the tentacles of that report went everywhere. And I think we've demonstrated as a council we can wrestle with those sort of things. We did it with the budget process jury's out, but I think we reached some harmony on where to go with that. And I just would like some assurance on specifically how we're going to take forward the Centre for Scrutiny report. That's one question. I wanted to make a reference to section 6 of the report on page 126. And I really, this is the section on people specifically, and I wanted to particularly commend that section because I thought it was very strong in the ideas that it was bringing forward. I particularly liked the idea, or at least the vision, of us being able to second people through their careers with partner organisations, which seems to me difficult to achieve, but really well worth it if we can, and especially important if we are a smaller organisation ourselves. And I think it's always been unknown to me really why the council doesn't seem to have had any involvement with schemes like I think the Local Government Association run for graduate trainees, which other authorities do participate in and I think get a lot from. It may be there's some reason why it's not right here, but it would be good to know what they are. Moving on from that section, I wanted to refer to the financial section on page 128, which I think has been touched on already, but the sort of perspective I saw this chart in was that we're possibly moving towards, with some confidence, the block of savings which are described as efficiency savings, and there are numbers on those, achievable, we think, 2.5 million. But really, the larger part of what's on this table is not really covered in this report at all, and that's described as based on political decisions. And I just wonder whether I didn't quite understand Councillor Davies' reply to that question, which I think is similar to the one that Councillor Bennett asked. What is happening there? Because an awful lot of effort has gone into the 2.5 million for the first block, but there's nothing in this report about the second block, which is actually of larger value and therefore potentially much more impactful and critical. And I wondered in relation to, well, any part of that table, whether we can be told what sort of impact on jobs we're talking about here. To have the numbers, we must be talking about, we must have a known number of assumptions as far as the impact on jobs. I mean, clearly it can be other costs as well, the way we're sourcing things that we might not do at all, or do through someone else's staff, but I think it would be interesting to know what that sort of quantum of saving that's on that chart means as far as jobs is concerned. And I think that was all my questions. Thank you.
To answer that.
Clearly, some of them are me. I think 1 and 3 for sure. I don't know about 2. What do you think? Shall I go first? Okay. The CFGS proposals, I think we are committed. In fairness, Anna, Councillor Smith is the lead on that, so I understand she's now out of the building, as they say. So, but my understanding is that she's committed to all party working on this, again, for the reasons that I gave earlier on. This is about the work of the council, not a party political process, even though clearly as a party we will take a view, just as I'm sure yourselves and the Greens will. But we remain committed, and I'd like to put on record the desire to work with yourselves on how the governance of the council is managed and run. I think there has been some timescale issues, but hopefully they'll be resolved as a matter of urgency. So I'll undertake to take that away and forward on to Councillor Smith. I think perhaps if we are going to have quarterly meetings, as per Councillor Bennett's suggestion, it would make sense to include CFGS in that as a matter of urgency. The third bit, I think, probably relates more to Councillor S. Simon's question. When the transformation team was set up, they were set up to find X amount of savings, i.e. £5 million. And within that, they've set out a budget format in how they'll go about doing that. And we're obviously working closely with them. I suppose to an extent, as you'd expect, we look at to use the cliche, the low-hanging fruit first, and that's the 2.5 million. I'm still expecting that the other 2.5 million will come from the Our Cambridge programme. But I think going back to, again, Councillor Smith's question, and Councillor Bennett's questions, we're going to have to accelerate that and look at greater savings. My response, just to clarify about the other chunk, is that we would expect our officers to be looking now at the other 5.5 million. And that's been explicit, I think, from Robert Pollock and Christine Ryber as to how that will be taking place. So when the BSR proposals come through in the autumn, we would expect to see from our officers not just bids for money, but savings over the coming years. And that's something that has to be part and parcel of the process. Taking the requirements seriously. The one rider in all that is that, obviously without wishing to blur into the debate that might come later on the MTFS, we do have some reserves that we would want to use initially to cover off any savings that haven't been made. And the second uncertainty is clearly the complete shambles that is the Conservative government's approach to local authority, which makes long-term planning quite problematic. And I suspect we'll come back to that as well a bit later on. Those are questions 1 and 3. I think, are you, number 2, Councillor Vick, can you just remind me what that one was?
Which order on?
It was the one, well, it wasn't CFGS, it wasn't...
It was about people.
People, yes.
It was a rather complimentary remark about that section.
In which case,
doesn't actually need a reply, but if there is one, that would be fantastic.
In which case, thanks to Nick and Tori, I think, there was a bit that I've missed, and forgive me. It's about the people costs that might be required, the savings that might come later. I hope you'll forgive me, but at this stage, as we haven't even started the senior management review and haven't even got in place for definite how the organisation will look, it's very difficult to identify what the numbers will be, and it would be wholly inappropriate to do so without having proper discussions with staff, managers and the unions. Early days, Councillor Bick, I think, but we will be coming back to that. And again, I'm sure it's something you'll be wanting to both be appraised of, but also challenge us on occasion. Thank you.
I think our CEO would like to make a contribution.
It's all right, Chair. Thank you. A couple of points for Councillor Bick around, we are part of the LGA's National Graduate Development Programme. So we've got an individual who's on her 2nd or 3rd rotation. This year we also took part in the District Council Network, a leadership development programme, one of our senior members of the finance team. So that had a specific East of England angle to it as well. So we've met at Grafham Water to do a kind of bit of collective work across district authorities in our area. On the numbers, I think you're referring to the table at 7.2. As a rule of thumb, and building on the point that Councillor Daly has made, as a rule of thumb, we need to do further work, but for every £1 million, if you look at our median salary, could be around 25 posts, but obviously that depends on where they are in the organisation, etc., etc. Thank you.
Now I have Councillor Smart would like to speak.
Thanks, Chair. So it's not a question, that's why I left it till later, and I'll be brief. So I think Councillor Bick is right. It's about continuing change. I mean, I've experienced that myself. You're frowning, Chair, as if I'm doing the wrong thing. I don't know. I'll be brief. I won't take too long. About continuing change, and I think that's not a bad thing. I think we should always be looking to improve what we do. And I said before at a briefing, which I'm going to say again now, with regard to my own experience working at the council, where I came from business and the cultural sector and worked in the council, and that's when I learned what it was to be a council employee. And I think that's important. And if there is a question in here, I suppose it's to do with whether the team, Nick and Tori and others, recognise that we don't make widgets here, we do something that's different. My experience of staff, both as an employee and as a councillor, is that they are totally committed to residents and to the organisation and working together to do the best we can for residents. And I've seen that myself, and I think it's a real thing. I felt it when I worked here, and I feel it obviously now as a councillor, but that's different. So I think that's something to take on board in this transformation programme. I think it's something to hold on to, not lose, and keep first and foremost in terms of what we do as an organisation for residents. So I just also wanted to say well done to that team, officers and councillors. I believe that what they're doing is good stuff, and I think it's improving what we do as a council for residents, so I fully support it.
Thank you. Have you had further questions or comments? No, in that case, let's turn to the recommendations on page 119, is it?
Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Bick.
Could we vote on those in part?
Right, let's have a look and see what you're talking about. Right, 4 bullet points. You want to vote on each one of them separately or just one of them separately? Each one. Okay, we know your style. Right, okay. We have 4 recommendations on page 120. We take them one at a time. The first one to note the progress made. Can I see all those in favour?
Unanimous, yeah.
Second item to confirm support. All those in favour?
Six.
Those against? Those abstaining?
One abstention.
One abstention. Item 3, agree the officers move forward. Those in favour?
Six.
Those against? Those abstaining? One abstention.
Yeah.
Item 4, note the programme timetable. Those in favour? Unanimous, thank you. Right, Councillor Davey, what do you think about that?
I'm happy to support the recommendations, but before I do, can I just express my gratitude and thanks to Nick Kemp. I understand it's likely to be his last, if you like, appearance before this committee. And I think when you look back at where we were in December of this year and to where we are now, the transformation within the transformation team has been quite remarkable. There's an awful lot of work that's gone on that hasn't been clear to the group tonight because we've so focused upon organisational design, but there's an awful lot going on. And so therefore, as he departs, I'd want to say thank you formally to Nick for all his work over the past 10 months and to offer Tory good luck in the coming months. So thank you very much. And on that note, I would like to accept the recommendations. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Now, I think I'll go back to item 7 on page 59. Is Caroline available now?
Yeah.
Had a tea and settle down, thank you. Would you like to present this report then, please, on Treasury Management?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies again for being a bit late. The traffic out in Cambridge was truly horrendous tonight. Treasury Management Mid-Year Review. This is the regular half-year update report that the committee would normally receive at this meeting every year. It is for recommendation to Council, and it's been prepared in line with the CIPFA Prudential and Treasury Management Codes. Clearly, this report is done at a time of considerable uncertainty in financial markets, and therefore it's probably worth stressing at this point that we follow the guidance in those codes to ensure that our investments are selected first for security of the capital amount, second for liquidity, and finally for yield. So security always being the most important. Going into the report, I'd like to just highlight 5.10, which reports a potential breach of lending limit to Santander, where the deposit account limit of 5 million was adhered to, but we also held certificates of deposit with that counterparty under a separate general certificate of deposit limit. So we had Santander investments under the specified investments heading, but also under the unspecified, and the unspecified had no limits as to counterparty. Overall, the holding was within the limits advised by our Treasury Management advisors. However, we have amended the counterparty list to avoid any misunderstandings due to the split of the specified and unspecified investments. And one of the recommendations today is for the committee to recommend the revised counterparty list to council for approval. In section 7, the council's prudential and treasury management indicators are presented as required. This includes a new indicator, the liability benchmark, at 7.5. This shows our existing loan portfolio against our predicted borrowing needs, showing that we will be required to borrow in the future. I don't think this is a surprise or news to anyone. The benchmark is showing us what we were aware of anyway. So going back to the recommendations, it is to ask that the prudential and treasury management indicators are recommended to council, as is the revised counterparty list. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions, please. Okay.
Chair, I'd like to ask about the second recommendation, which is about the revised counterparty list.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that I'm reading this correctly and would love to have that clarified. It seems to me that the new approach here is a sort of absolving ourselves of decision-making and sort of passing that over to Link completely, where previously we have retained some judgment in-house. And I guess there are two issues that occur to me, that if we absolutely lock ourselves into judgments made by an outside organisation like Link, do we not open ourselves up to a sort of domino theory of judgment, which we haven't really exercised any independent judgment about on an individual case, and also looking at the way the limits are expressed, it doesn't. I mean, I don't really understand how the limits have been arrived at through Link. Are they determined in relation to our likely need for deposits, and so do they take into account the fact that taking the top line, 35 million may be all we have on deposit, and therefore it's 100% of our use of that kind of money, or are they just expressed by Link in general for any organisation in that way? And also, previously, the counterparty list has, by having lower limits, has tended to ensure that the place we put our deposits is spread between a number of organisations, which may be of like risk, but actually are different institutions, completely financially separate from each other, and therefore arguably can mitigate risk simply on a sort of spread basis. I just have those concerns about that particular recommendation this way forward.
Certainly. I think my answer to the first one would be that we have always taken advice from Link on the amounts that we can lend to certain specified banks and building societies. We are just now using their colour coding, which underlied what we had before. So I think if you go back to the original counterparty list, which appears on page 74 onwards, you will see that we have been using Link's credit criteria for a number of our counterparties previously. The colour coding that is now used is just simplifying, rather than naming the banks and building societies separately. We are taking them within their colour coding provided by Link. And this colour coding and their recommendations are based on a review of a number of indicators on a daily basis. So the colour, if you like, of a particular bank could change from day to day, but will always be taken on the day that we make any deposits. I don't really see how using this method would limit the spread. We would be looking for, when we make a deposit, we look for a certain amount to deposit for a certain amount of time, and we would look over the span of the different institutions to which we could lend that money, and lend accordingly. So, for example, where we have an orange rated counterparty, we could be lending up to 12 months, up to 30 million for that particular counterparty. So I think we have specific, we have the opportunity to spread. We certainly wouldn't be putting all our money, or even a significant part of our money, with one counterparty. What this also means is that when we come to the second part of the counterparty list, the specified investments, and we begin looking at, say, certificates of deposit on page 72, the financial instruments that are certificates of deposit, we would be working within the limits of the colour coding seen above. And this was the problem we had with Santander. We had two limits effectively we were using, and this actually prevents, if you like, that lack of spreading by specifying very clearly how much can be put with one institution. So,
do you have any further question? No. So I'll just come back to you, Councillor. Oh, so you are next, Councillor Payne, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies also for my lateness. I assume I was in the same traffic as Caroline, if only we had better buses. I just want to ask you, in some ways, a connected question relating to point 5.12 on page 63, which I wonder if raises one of the potential shortcomings, which perhaps we're a bit concerned about, with a heavy dependency on Link, which is relating to Thurrock Council, where we've all possibly seen the media coverage recently. It says here that we're quite reassured that we'll receive the funds back to us. I wondered if you could just tell us a bit, Caroline, about are we 100% sure of that, and what's been the extent of our negotiations there so far? And also, in retrospect, perhaps could you comment on how wise we were to invest in Thurrock Council, and to what extent and what sort of due diligence was carried out before we made that decision? Thank you.
We are as close to 100% as you can get sure that we will get our money back. We have lent to Thurrock before and we have received the funds back. All local authorities are considered to be a very, very low credit risk. Even Thurrock, even Slough, even Nottingham, all the various ones that you hear in the headlines are still managing their treasury cash. They're taking borrowings for short term. They're paying borrowings back. And we have no concerns at all. In fact, we had 2 tranches of £5 million back over the last few weeks from Thurrock. We would not normally do specific due diligence on any particular local authority because they are considered to be a very low risk indeed. And we are conscious that local authorities manage their cash as a whole, and in fact, it's not possible to say what exactly they're borrowing their cash for. Are they borrowing it to fund their capital programme? Are they borrowing it to fund house building? Are they borrowing it for other investments? Now, I know Thurrock has been in the news in particular for some of its investment decisions. We have no link and no way of knowing in what way Thurrock has used our cash. In the same way as anybody who loans us money, should we need it, we'll know exactly what we're using the cash for. So on that basis, we loan money to local authorities. It's usually done through an agent, and they are and have been very good, not just Thurrock, but other local authorities tend to pay attractive rates. Another reason for using them, attractive rates for what is really a low risk investment. And only a short-term investment, I would say, as well.
Comment any further? Okay. I would just comment that it's interesting, even if we had looked into what Thurrock were going to do with this money, we might have felt it was very good because they were going to build solar farms. The fact that they lost some of the money, disappeared somewhere, is a rather different matter. But anyway, we have the fortunate, or not so fortunate, we have this the confirmation that the government would back up the councils. And so this is, as you say, a very low risk. Now we have Councillor Smith.
I think the optics didn't look good in respect of Thurrock, and I question whether it was sensible to put £15 million into Thurrock at one time. And I think we just have to think about the Nick Leeson effect. You know, someone's rogue players in these organisations can bring a financial institution to its knees. So I think we have to exercise a degree of caution from the point of view of the public's perception of how we manage the Treasury, as opposed to what the real risk is, because of course I don't believe that a local authority has ever been allowed to go bust. So I think the risk in that respect is zero, rather than very low. It's absolutely zero. So I think I just wanted to make that point. Can I just pick up then on the forecast interest receipts for the financial year, section 1.15 of the report. This is at £1,159,000. Now, at section 5.4, the average rate of return for all deposits to 21st of September 22 is 1.48% on deposits of 178 million, which is confirmed at Appendix C. That amounts to 1.3 million in H1 22-23. So could we have clarification of the projected interest receipts on the Council's cash investment deposits for the financial year 22-23, and the steps being taken to ensure the Council maximises interest receipts in a period of rising base rates? Thank you. And I'll have another question now.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Smith. I will need to look into the specific projection for the year, because I can see the question you're asking and the apparent inconsistency. However, the officer who drafted this is on leave this week, so I will need to go back and ask about the calculations underlying this, but I will get back to the committee on the particular figures. I do wonder whether there is some potential inconsistency of how the loans to the KIP and the Treasury Management deposits are feeding into those figures, and I suspect that that might be the reason behind it. Going on to the question about the investing for higher interest rates as the rates go up, we do tend to try to keep our lending at the moment relatively short so that we can benefit on the rates as they go up. We also, of course, we look for the higher rates, and I guess I'd refer you back to the last question on Thurrock. It is typical that Thurrock offer a little bit extra against other local authorities at times, as do a number of the other authorities who are in a similar situation, if I can put it that way. So we do, when we have money to invest, we do look at what's available to us at that point in time, and we also consider the need for cash flow in the future when we have certain large payments going out. So it is the job of the Treasury Management team to maximise those interest receipts based on what they have offered them at the time that we're making the investment.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question about Appendix C, page 68, which shows the general fund capital expenditure and the finance costs. Now, when you look at the CapEx, it's a large capital investment programme, 145 million in 22-23 alone. And as a result of that, general fund finance costs are going to soar from £207,000 in 22-23 up to 2.6 and 2.5 million in 24-5 and 25-6. And I just, those sums amount to quite a large proportion of the general fund net saving requirement. Now, just looking at the CapEx that's in the schedule, you'll see there are some very big ticket items like Park Street, 48 million, and a number of others that are loans and development, equity loans and development loans for the Council House building programme. Now, much of that capital looks to me as if it's going to be returned or it's going to generate income and savings. Now, is it accounting conventions that are making the general fund net saving requirement look worse than it actually will be, because you can't recognise the impact of repayment of loans, equity stakes and revenue, income and savings in your forecasts?
No, it isn't. If I can explain a little bit of the forecasting behind these, I think we have a very mixed capital programme, as you've indicated. For example, we have Park Street, where we will be taking on a considerable loan, but which will generate revenue to meet that, the interest requirements and the repayment requirements. What we will also what you've also pointed out is you have the KIP loans that will be returned. Those have been excluded from the particular forecasts that underlie those financing costs. What those financing costs are based on is our 10-year forecast of capital spend, which has been put together not only from our existing capital programme, but what heads of service consider to be their capital needs going forward for 10 years. There is a mixture in there of investment or capital spend, a lot of which is not revenue generating. But even where revenue is generated, we are taking the gross financing costs here to the net revenue stream. So there's no acknowledgement of the income side of some of our capital investments. That falls within the net revenue stream calculation. So it is a convention, it is a forecast, and I would stress very highly that it is a forecast. It encompasses not only interest costs but minimum revenue provision, and of its nature it has got a considerable uncertainty in it, particularly at this point in time with a transformation programme implementation pending. It is very difficult to be confident, I suppose, over a 10-year capital forecast. It is difficult to be confident about interest rates, and it is certainly difficult to be confident of when certain capital expenditure may occur. So whilst this is a useful indication that we are probably going into a period where the financing costs will increase, whether they will increase to this extent, I think, is dependent on many things, including decisions that members make going forward when it comes to transformation and capital spending.
Thank you very much for that.
Right, any further questions from anybody? No? Okay. Back to the beginning, which is page 59. Recommendations.
Chair, I'm going to make the same request for parts, please.
Which? Yeah, the third one is about, no. Which one are you referring to as Park Street?
No, I think he's just taking them in parts.
Three parts, yes, okay, I misheard you, sorry. Okay, so we got, the first recommendation is to accept the indicators, basically. Can I see those in favour, please show? That's unanimous. Second item is to accept the revised counterparty list. Approve it. 6. Those against? Those abstaining? 2. Thank you. Third item is to approve the addition of the loan to the KIP. All those in favour, please show. Unanimous, thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Davey, what do you think of it? Would you like to accept that recommendation?
I would indeed. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Right, now we go on to the General Fund Medium-Term Financial Strategy. Again, Caroline, would you like to present this?
Thank you, Chair. So the MTFS takes our financial projections that were done at February last year for the budget setting report, It updates them across a range of assumptions, including inflation, interest rates, pay awards, etc. On the latest information available, which was when the underlying work and number work was done for this, was July. It provides us a starting point for the budget setting for 23-24. As has been said before, the economic situation is particularly difficult and uncertain at the moment. Although we have based our general and pay inflation on what we knew at the time, we realise that these may now need updating and will be looked at again for the budget setting process. In particular, at the time, it was felt that normal levels of inflation and that would be resumed fairly quickly, whereas I think now the tail of the higher inflation is probably expected to be rather longer. In that regard, the outlook has worsened, and we await the latest OBR forecasts to be published with the next fiscal event. Likewise, it is difficult to predict what will happen to local government funding, and it has been assumed within this modelling that the various reviews that we've been expecting for several years now will not be done and implemented until 25-26 at the earliest. Looking at the detail, we have proposed a revenue bid to be enacted in the 22-23 financial year to bring pay budgets in line with the proposed 2022-23 pay award. And that is a bid for £1,122,000 to be added to in-year budgets. Including this and other modelling assumptions has produced an increased 5-year net new savings target of 11.5 million, with scenarios with assumptions differing, ranging from 9.7 up to a potential 19 million. Clearly extremely an extremely wide range of scenarios, but I would point out that if you like, the higher, more of the scenarios come higher than the 11.5 than come lower. So I think we must be prepared for the 11.5 to be potentially increased. Moving on to capital, 2 proposals are put forward. One is for the Wren Solar project, which went to a previous committee in this cycle as a project and for scrutiny, and a further budget bid to uplift the budget for the redevelopment of the Silver Street toilets. And those 2 bids appear on what is page 15 and 16 of the MTFS document, which on your agenda is 99, no, sorry, page 100 and page 101. I'm also moving on to reserves. I'm recommending a small increase in the prudent minimum balance of general fund reserves, based really on increased levels of spend due to inflation. And you can find that on page 103. Finally, I'm recommending that the Cambridge Live Development Fund has a balance of 213,000 on it. which is no longer required, and therefore approval is sought to return it to the general fund reserves. Section 7 describes the expected savings to be delivered by our Cambridge programme, and you've already seen the report on that. I have used figures from within that report to look at what would happen to our reserves should the savings be delivered as expected, but no further savings delivered. So the savings gap, the budget gap there, the assumptions are that it would be filled by reserves. And the graph on page 108 shows what would happen in two scenarios with our reserves. The left-hand or orange coloured bars show what would happen if we have no business rates growth going into reserves, and is a worst case scenario. Business rates growth is uncertain, firstly, and secondly, would be wiped out by a business rates reset, which is one of the changes or one of the reviews that I referred to earlier. So the orange bars, which fall below the prudent minimum balance in 26-27, are probably a worst case. The green bars, which are the right-hand side of the pairs, are if we were to be able to maintain a certain level of business rate growth. I think what this shows us that we must be looking for further savings, as previously discussed, in order to ensure that the council remains sustainable. And therefore, we really must be looking to make sure that there's no additional spending in the 23-24 budget if it can be avoided. It's worth noting the revised budget process and timetable summarised on page 110, which reflects the change budget process as discussed in the Civic Affairs Committee and recommended to Council later this month. And I'm happy to take any questions on the MTFS.
Questions? Mary Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Given that I've advocated for improvement in the formatting of this report and more use of varied methods of presentation such as graphs, it would be extremely discourteous of me not to thank Caroline and her team for the improvements we can all see this year. So, thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Caroline's team, for the improvements. I've given you 2 seconds to appreciate that. So perhaps I can now move on to my question, which is, despite these very welcome improvements, I don't think, and I'd say this question is more for Mike than for you, if that's okay. I don't think the general public has any understanding whatsoever of the council's financial position. And I feel that we need to work harder to get that position across. Because otherwise, our chances of getting buy-in, continued buy-in to our Cambridge as savings start to bite, is really quite minimal. And I would ask Mike if he would be prepared to meet with us cross-party to discuss how we can get that information across more clearly. Thank you.
Could I just respond, Chair? It's a tricky one, this, because you can take a horse to water, but you cannot make the horse drink. We do press releases at every BSR. We do press releases at the MTFS. And in the 2.5 years that I've been responsible for finance, at no stage has any been more pleasurable to response than it's disastrous, the impact upon local government authority. In addition to which, as part of our Labour Party, admittedly therefore party political broadcasts, I'm asked to do a bit on the budget, which always outlines how difficult life is. And it's very tricky, therefore, so how we improve and enhance that is something that I'm more than happy to take advice from. And your colleague, Councillor Davis, has already been in touch, and I think I'm meeting you for a coffee on Thursday to discuss this. I wonder, however, if the question is actually more addressed at the Cambridge News and the Cambridge Independent than it is at me, if I'm honest, because how many times do you have to say things are difficult? Maybe it's about the way we say it. Maybe that's something that we need to address. Maybe it's the type of ways we say it. Again, maybe that's something that we need to address. It's also, if I'm honest, Naomi, a balance between things are tough, but we operate prudently and efficiently and effectively within the money we get. And it's how do you create a balance between we're at difficult times, but we're doing it properly? Because that can, I do appreciate, give a different impression. But I take the comments, and I'm more than happy to meet, and probably, as you can tell by meeting Sam, it's a good indication that I'm more than willing to discuss how we can improve our communications to the people of Cambridge. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Questions, Councillor Bick?
Yes, the assumptions page of this MTFS is probably not worth hanging one's hat on at this stage, just to give my impressions of that. But I have a particular question around something which I think is a little bit more tangible at the moment and is quite important for understanding how the organisation assimilates current high levels of inflation. So on page 97, there is a very short paragraph on 2022-23 forecasts. Now, just to pause a moment and recall that what was different about this year's budget for the General Fund in the Council was that we chose this year not to budget for inflation, which was in retrospect a strange year to choose to do that. But we had a discussion at the time of the budget, which Councillor Davey may remember, about ways in which we could, as a council, understand and scrutinise how services were managing to absorb inflation. When we were talking, inflation was a lot lower than it is now, so the question is much more important now. And what Councillor Davies said was that we would have that review at the time of the MTFS. And just reading this paragraph, I'm a little bit disappointed, and I cannot believe that this is it, because it doesn't really tell us anything except that the forecast at the end of June for the full year was for an overspend of 900,000. And that apparently included the proposed pay offer, which obviously explains most of that amount. And so I don't know whether there is another forecast available to us at the end of the second quarter with which can help us understand that. I mean, I would love to know what the advice to services was. Is it, if you need to do what you have to do and overspend? Reference is made here to in-year management of expenditure, which is exactly what we had hoped to be able to scrutinise at this point. And I do feel that we made a bit of a fuss about this at the time of the budget, and we were told that we would get our chance to do this during the year, and it seems that we really can't, because if this is the basis of it, there's hardly anything here to ask a question about, and there's no illumination of how how services are absorbing inflation beyond pay, of which there must be some. Is it through not filling vacancies? Is it through leaving things and not doing them? Or is it sort of finding cheaper sources for things that need to be bought? But that's the sort of information that I think it's really important that we do have at a time of high inflation, so that we understand as members, rather than just saying, well, it's all too complicated for us to allocate savings, we'll just say that the council has to find 10% across the board, and we don't really know how they did that, if they do it at all. So I don't know who needs to respond to that, but we're still waiting for the evidence of how this is working, and this really isn't it at the moment.
I want to go first, then I'll chip in.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Davey. The Q1 forecast, which is referred to here, is a high-level summary of our Q1 financial monitoring report that is shared with yourself and with the executive, and that gives a more granular presentation. It is an incredibly complex position, I think, underlying the numbers. And I think the in-year mitigations are probably everything you mentioned and a number of other items. What we saw at the end of Q1 was effectively a balanced position if we put in the money for the pay award, which is what we are recommending in this MTFS. We will do another monitoring report at the end of Q2, which we will always also share. That work is currently underway and will be available in a couple of weeks' time. We will then be able to see how the services are managing and whether they are still being able to mitigate the effects of inflation within their budgets, or whether we're beginning to see a drift towards an overspend. I think at that stage, we will look again to see if there are any trends or any specific areas where action is required. We did ask heads of service and their budget holders to manage their budgets to budget rather than to overspend. And as at Q1, that is what we saw. Clearly, Q1 is now over 3 months away, and I think we need to look forward now to the Q2 figures. Thank you.
Chip in now. I don't think we disagreed about the need to look at inflation. There was a discussion, I think, about how that should be done. And having liaised with Councillor DL, we agreed that you get the quarterly reports, which I hope you're getting. As Caroline says, that should give you the granular detail that we felt was necessary. And I've not had any comments back from yourself in between as to your views on what's there contained therein. As Caroline's indicated, there was the ask given to heads of service to manage within budget, which you'll be aware of as from the time before. And I think it's now a question of how we monitor that. The Q1 reports we've had, we'll see how Q2's going, although clearly it doesn't look as though it's going to be the easiest thing for our heads of service to do. I think, so therefore, the only question I can get from this is whether or not you feel within the MTFS we've given sufficient analysis of the detail, and clearly it's always a balance between getting that right. But I think we felt, in conjunction with Caroline, that it's those quarterly reports that gives the detail that we think, I think perhaps on reflection, that you quite rightly asked for. But we think that's the place to look at that and that detail. I'm more than happy to take comments when you receive those quarterly, and then we can feed back rather than necessarily at this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
I could just come back to say, certainly we received the quarterly report, in fact, that we've received the one, but that's because there has only been one so far. But that was not the core of the question that we were asking. The core of the question we were asking, I mean, if a service is on budget, how are they on budget? At what cost are they on budget? That was the nature of the question. And that's what we really don't have the answer to from those reports, and we don't have it in here either. And that was the reason for the point I was making.
Okay, is it possible to come back? Are you asking, therefore, that heads of service should respond in addition to the quarterly reports to give you an indication as to how they're managing their budgets? Okay,
Exactly, yes, exactly that.
Okay, if I get, I'll take that forward and see what is and isn't practical through Caroline, Robert, and the directors. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Further questions? Jane.
Excuse me, thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a quick specific question about the Silver Street toilets? So on page 101, we're reallocating some of the budget from a future year. Can I just ask for an update on why that's necessary, please? Thank you.
Who would like this?
Right. If I can take that one, my understanding is that the it is an inflationary impact on the scheme, and that tenders have come back higher than was originally in the budget. You'll see that the budget was originally approved in 1819, so there is plenty of time, if you like, for inflation to take hold. This bid is for additional funding to complete the project, and what I am proposing is that in order to fund this, we should be taking this from the 23-24 allocation of capital funding. You may recall that we're trying to limit the general funding for capital in order to keep down the costs of borrowing, or to delay the requirement to borrow for as long as possible. So I think I'm making this allocation so that we can continue to control the amount of capital funding, and so that readers realise that by using 141 of next year's capital funding, there will be slightly less available for allocation through the budget setting process.
Okay. So I'll come back on that.
Thank you, Caroline. So can I just ask, so looking forward to the future, what that means in terms of the success of this project? Is it likely that we'll need to make further capital bids to complete that in the future if we're sort of taking from future years, as it were?
I think, well, that will depend on very much on the delivery of that project, and it's not something that I can really comment on. It is a practical capital project being delivered from within the council. When capital budgets are set, there is an understanding that there's a certain flexibility of 10% that we fund without asking project managers to come for additional funds. I think what we're seeing in the current inflationary situation is that many of these projects are now pushing that limit, and will need to come forward for further funding. I think the importance is that delivery, the quicker things can be delivered, the less likely there is to be further pressures on them.
So David?
If it helps Councillor Payne, there is political commitment from this side to make sure this happens.
Further questions? No? Right, in that case, we will turn to the recommendations on page 82.
Sorry, Chair, same question.
Okay. We've got three recommendations. We'll take them one at a time. First one is to approve the budget process and timetable. All those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Yeah. Second one is to agree the incorporation of changed assumptions. Those in favour, please show. 6. Those against? Those abstaining? 2. Third one is to agree the revenue budget for 22-23, etc. All those in favour? Unanimous, thank you.
Can we continue on to capital and reserves, please, Richard?
Okay. Yes, you're right. I see what you mean. There's two more. One at a time? One more. Yeah. Hey, right. So recommendations 2.4, 5, 6 and 7. All those in favour of those together, please show.
That's unanimous.
Unanimous, thank you. And Councillor Davies.
Yeah, and if I could, just before I approve, give a heartfelt thanks to Caroline and her team. It's difficult enough to try and manage the finances of the authority if one lives in inverted commas, normal times. Normal now appears to include Brexit and coming out of COVID. But in addition to which, we're now having to try and manage in complete uncertainty following a rather strange mini-budget proposed by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. And the chaos that entails clearly has a knock-on effect for all our staff as we try to manage the finances of the Council prudently. And as such, I'd really like to say thank you to Caroline and her team for the work that they do, because it's underknown, understated, and exemplary. So thank you. And on that note, I would therefore like to approve the proposals made by the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, we've been running for 2 hours now. I think we need a break. I'm proposing a break of 15 minutes. So that's till 7:10. Thank you. start? Okay. We're live, are we? Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to move on to item 11 next, because the last item will then be the one with the potential confidential item on it. So the next item is therefore South Cambridgeshire District Plan, District Council 4-day working week trial. And I don't know whether, Deborah, you're going to introduce it, okay. Over to you, Deborah. Can you introduce yourself and your job title?
Good evening, I'm Deborah Simpson, I'm Head of HR at Cambridge City, and I'm here to introduce this item which is on the South Cambridgeshire District Council 4-day working week. Attached to the agenda is the Cabinet report from South Cambridgeshire, and contained in the report is some more information about the 4-day week. The move by South Cambridgeshire to consider a 4-day working week is a very bold and very brave and innovative proposal. It would be the first local authority in the country to adopt such an approach. The trial will start in January. There'll be a period of intense planning between now and January, and we will be involved in that planning process. The report in front of you highlights two issues really for consideration, which is the relationship with the shared services, and planning and waste are referred to in terms of the recommendations at 2.3 and 2.4. I'm very happy to introduce to you Liz Watts, who is the Chief Exec of South Cambridgeshire District Council and who is here to answer any questions and to talk to the report. Stephen Kelly is also present on Teams to refer to any matters relating to the planning service, and Robert Pollock, our Chief Exec, is here. And if you have anything left that may be of an HR nature, then I'll be happy to answer any questions. So I'd like to hand over to Liz Watts at this point.
Please go ahead, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Liz Watts, Chief Executive of South Cambridgeshire District Council. I wasn't really going to spend much time talking through the report tonight because you've got it in front of you, but I'm really happy to answer any questions. Obviously, I've briefed a number of your meetings over the last 4 weeks. Yeah, I'm basically just very happy to answer any questions.
Does Stephen Kelly, can't you or just respond?
Chair, no, I'm happy just to respond to any questions in relation to the implications of shared planning service.
All right, so open it up to any questions anybody wishes to make. Councillor Smart.
A few notes. I'll go through the recommendations point by point. So 2.1, Appendix 1. I note that it's authored by Liz Watts, who is clearly not officer of Cambridge City Council. So can I, as a Cambridge City Councillor, put questions to Liz and expect fulsome answers when she is employed by another authority? 2.2, the shared planning service is just that, jointly provided by both South Cambridgeshire District Council and Cambridge City Council. This recommendation, 2.3, talks about taking decisions, including about a 4-day week. They should be made jointly. Is this not rather ironic, at least as far as it would appear that South Cambs District Council have already taken this decision unilaterally? So did anyone at South Cambridgeshire District Council think to ask or even tell anyone here at Cambridge City Council, like for example the leader, and if so who, that you plan to trial a 4-day working week that would affect our employees and potentially our residents in Cambridge? 2.4. Do you plan to obtain evidence for the success or otherwise of the 4-day working week from a trial lasting 3 months? Can you really provide sufficient information to make such a huge structural change for employment and working conditions from this 3-month trial? You may well be planning to extend this trial. We really wouldn't know, I suppose. However, even if longer, I can't see how I can be sure that that any apparent or hoped for change would be sustainable over the longer term. At the briefing you gave, which I attended, you said, Liz, that staff would be so tired at the end of the 4 days because they've been working so much harder that they'd need the next day to rest. In that briefing, I also said that aside from information for councillors, which is obviously important as the elected representatives of the people, I felt that the most important thing that I could think of to say was that you should allow in South Cambridgeshire District Council, you should allow for the public to debate the proposal rather than keeping it secret. I am sure that members of the public might have something to say on the matter, useful contributions that might have helped all concerned to get the best plan in place. It is, after all, residents' money that fund the councils through their council tax payments, and the effective increase in the hourly rate of pay by 20% should be of interest to them. Thank you.
Answer those questions, please.
I'm happy to, Chair. I'm not sure I can answer the first question about whether you're prepared to accept answers from me as Chief Executive of another council.
I think we are quite happy to receive your answers. Yes.
Thank you. I'll take your questions in order, Councillor Smart, if I may. Did anybody ask the City Council? I had spoken in confidence to my colleague Robert, and I'd asked him to kind of maintain that confidence for the simple reason that directly prior to the trial, we were carrying out a very intensive health and wellbeing survey with all colleagues at South Cambridgeshire. And that data was really important because it's given us a baseline from which to measure the trial. Had we managed to do that survey a bit earlier, we would have had a bit more time to talk to partners, but I'm afraid time just didn't allow. So again, as I've said to you previously, I'm really sorry that we didn't manage to spend more time briefing partners, and in hindsight, that's a decision that I certainly regret. In terms of whether the 3-month trial is long enough, you'll see in the South Cambridgeshire Cabinet paper that the idea is to do a 3-month trial because it's really a very short snapshot that will show us 1 quarter's performance, that's January to March performance, and it will allow us to very quickly understand, is performance maintained? Because obviously that's the most important thing in terms of the trial. Can we demonstrate that we can maintain performance to residents, customers, businesses? If it is maintained, the idea is to move to a longer, potentially 1-year trial, but obviously we can't make that decision yet because we need to get through the first sort of stage, if you like, the first the 3-month trial. So you're absolutely right. 3 months isn't long enough to be able to say, could we move to be a 4-day-week employer? But it is long enough to give us some reassurance that we could do a longer trial. In terms of employment working conditions, you mentioned, that I'd said that people will be really tired at the end of the 4 days. I think what I perhaps meant is that in order to move from 5 days to 4 days, you need to completely change the way that you work. You can't continue to work in the same way and squeeze everything into 5 days. It's clearly not possible. So people will need to be more focused, do things differently, and all the trials that are going on at the moment across the UK, Ireland and the US have shown that actually people really like that. They like the opportunity to have the extra day off a week, and they feel that it is a good reciprocal deal to change the way that they work when they are at work. So, this is all about sort of the psychological contract that an employer has with their employees. And in general, people are finding that it's a really good deal for both sides. Now, you know, we are the first public sector organisation to do this sort of trial in the UK, and so we don't know what will happen. But it is very much a trial, and you know, we have the data and metrics in place to be able to measure it and make some kind of objective analysis of whether it works or not. In terms of whether the public should debate, I think at this stage it's probably too early. It's just a 3-month trial. We have had a question, at least, well, we had 11 questions from one member of the public at our recent council meeting, which we answered. We've got an opportunity for the public to provide feedback or ask questions on our website. But you know, this feels at the moment very much as though it's testing the water in terms of is it something that we can make work, and therefore I'm not sure it would be appropriate to have a kind of big public debate about it at this stage. I think that was all of your questions, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I must say, compliment you. You were very good at picking out questions, so thanks for that, Liz. But that's part of my point, really, I suppose, is you are a very experienced chief executive. Your leader at South Cambridgeshire District Council is a very experienced politician. What could you have been thinking of to initiate such a process with your partner without consulting with your partner? And I am aghast that you thought it was that what were you playing at? Informing the chief executive, but not the leader of the council, putting the chief executive in such a difficult position. I'm lost for words. The other point I wanted to make was that a smaller point, just on the trials and such like. In your report, you list the UK trial, which I think, if you were going to do it, you should be a part of that, not do your own thing for 3 months. So that trial, you list it as being a huge 4-day-week experiment. Now, only 70 companies are taking part in that experiment. There are 6 million companies in the UK. So that's a fraction of a 1%, a very small fraction of 1% of the companies in the UK. So I can't see how that is statistically significant in any real sense in terms of making an argument. But those aren't really questions, just comments. But thank you, Chair, and thanks, Liz, for the answers.
If I may just come back on the first point, Councillor Smart. We are in close contact with the 4-day week campaign. Their trial is being analysed by academics from Cambridge here and Boston in the US. And I've had a number of meetings with them. They actually have fed back that they think our trial is incredibly well planned because we've allowed a 3-month planning period, whereas most private sector companies who choose to do a 4-day week sort of go straight into it and aren't really sure what they're going to measure or how they're going to collect the data. And so in that sense, I'm getting quite a lot of support from the academics who are doing the sort of data analysis of the 4-day week global trials. Just a bit of feedback, really.
Kind of you just briefly let me come back. I mean, I am very supportive, Liz, of your general approach, the idea of trying new things and, you know, making working conditions for staff more flexible, that sort of thing. And I appreciate it's very difficult in councils often, I know in planning, because I'm chair of planning, for trying to get planning officers to come and stay and not get headhunted by some other firm somewhere else with their potentially better conditions of employment. So I know all of that. It's just the process here that I'm really critical of mostly. Thank you.
So I may say so. I think the problem is that you put in some doubt the credibility of the sharing services as a result of this, the way you went about it. And not just your services, all your services have been put in doubt now. So, can we go on to Councillor Bick? I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I wanted to welcome the boldness of thinking behind this initiative. And I think that, just to put it in perspective, we need to think of it in terms of the problem we're trying to fix, which is a really difficult and ongoing intransigent problem about about recruitment and retention. And, you know, if this isn't the sort of new thinking that is going to help us perhaps to a solution, then I think it behoves others to say what is, because it seems that a lot of the more conventional routes to solve the problem haven't dramatically worked so far. From this side, we would want to support this experiment, though I think understandably we need reassurance on some points, because it's our residents that receive service from a large part of the staff that would participate in this. On the point that Councillor Smart has been making, I do think that the City Council, and this is maybe a little bit of an aside from the specifics of this initiative, but I do think the City Council should be more assertive in its joint ownership of shared services. I mean, the hosting with one or other council of shared services was always considered an administrative necessity, not one to stand in the way of genuine joint decision making. And I say that as someone who was involved in the early stages of creating the services that we now share. And I think that whatever was the lead-in to this particular initiative should be a wake-up call on both sides, that we simply need to assert that we are joint partners on big decisions like this. But back to the points of reassurance. An experiment. So my question is, how controlled an experiment like this can actually be? Because my sense of the staff group that we're talking about here is that we aren't talking about a group of people who are, I imagine, notorious clock watchers anyway. And given that a lot of the time of many of them is spent working from home, how do we really know what hours it is taking a staff member to accomplish their output? There has been a lot of debate in the context of working from home about work-life balance, because people choose not to observe very regular working hours simply because they're not doing that in an office where people go home all at one time. And so my question really is, could we be looking at what looks like a formal success, but which actually doesn't stop the reality continuing very much as it has been doing, and that we haven't actually succeeded in changing very much at all? And the second point of reassurance that I have is what is envisaged as the guidance to staff on a very practical level participating in this experiment. What takes priority? So is that going to be getting the work done to meet deadlines? And there are external, somewhat non-negotiable deadlines in the planning world that we all are aware of. So should that be the priority, or should stopping at the limit of the reduced experimental hours be the priority? So should we be working out the effect during the experiment by looking at deadlines that haven't been met, or should we be looking at it at occasions where staff have had to go beyond the hours of the experiment in order to meet the deadlines? Now, speaking as a councillor who hears from residents who are often looking for more than they get from the planning service, I really hope that it's not going to be that we're introducing undue clock watching, and the thing that goes by the board is meeting deadlines and doing things by the time they should be done. And I think that would be really hard to justify to residents, and I think that would really get this experiment, a really bad name. The covering report at 3.1.4 says that the City Council is not taking the same risk as South Cambridgeshire. And I found that quite a strange statement to make, and I just wondered whether that could be explained in some way, because does that mean that if we suddenly have to spend a lot more money to make something work that isn't working as a result, that will be South Cambridgeshire money, not City Council money? Or does it mean something else? Because I really couldn't make sense of that in some way if we are really approaching this in a shared fashion. And just going on to my last point, which is that I think embarking on an experiment like this, we have to think about where it goes to. So one would hope that this would be a success. We'll see. But if it's a success, what will then happen? Because there is something unifying about the fact that people work 5 days a week, day weeks inside organisations. And if the next area to look at is the blue collar areas like shared waste, whilst I'm expressing enthusiasm for the project you've now got on the table, I would be enthusiastic about doing the same in other areas, but I'm really scratching my head to imagine how that actually works. It seems to me that there's something that someone needs to say which even makes that kind of look remotely possible. And if that did prove impossible, are we willing to accept the sort of the division within the organisations that is implied by blue-collar people having to work a 5-day week, but nice, flexible, white-collar people having longer weekends? And it just seems to me that we need to be really careful what we're walking into, unless we know at least some of the answers to the possible questions that lie down the road if we want to expand this into blue-collar areas. Because really speaking, the output of shared waste is so digital. It's so much a percentage hopefully in the 90s or more, 90s of a percent of bins collected on time and on the right day, that we're going to know about it as a council if the cost of an experiment doesn't deliver the same. Because in the city anyway, it means bins left on the street, out on the street. It makes the whole city look untidy. It's not just a few people that get a bit upset. And I think that it's a concern that I have, that we don't have I haven't seen anywhere the remotest idea of how this could translate to those blue collar jobs. And those were my.
Would you like to answer some of those questions?
Yeah, of course, Chair. So the first question was, how controlled an experiment can it be in this? And I think you were sort of suggesting that, people might just work longer hours because they've got work to do. And so you'll never really know, did it work or not? I mean, interestingly, we've just had the data back from the Health and Wellbeing Survey that I mentioned, and this is kind of high-level data at the moment, but what it says is that actually the vast majority of our colleagues at the moment think that their workload they can manage their workload currently. So what we're not seeing, which I think possibly is a bit counterintuitive, we're not seeing a lot of colleagues who are doing masses and masses of hours over their contract. Now, I think quite a lot of colleagues use the flexibility that we already provide, like flexi time. So you may well see colleagues, working late at night or early in the morning, and then recovering those hours the following month or when they take their flexi time. But that survey data was really useful because it doesn't show us that we've got very, very, very overworked colleagues at the moment. It does show us some other interesting things, which is that there are some kind of risks around some other areas that I won't go into because it's a bit of a distraction here. But so I think we have good baseline data. Now, after the 3-day week trial, we'll do exactly the same survey again, and that will tell us, do people think that their workload is manageable, as they did in August, doing a 4-day week or not? And that is the whole purpose of having the baseline data and then doing the trial. I think that is actually a really solid kind of evidence base. So I think we will be able to tell. In terms of guidance for staff participating, what takes priority, will people meet deadlines? So the way that we're proposing to run the planning period, and there's plenty of evidence around this, that change works best when people who are, the subject of the change are involved in shaping it. And so that was the purpose of the 3-month, 2.5-month now planning period. So the idea is that during the remainder of October, we gather ideas from everybody, and we're running a whole series of focus groups and red team groups and working through teams, collecting people's ideas. And then November will be a period where my project team, which includes Deborah, will be analysing those ideas and going through, okay, what works for individuals, what works for teams, what may work for a team but actually would have an adverse impact on another team and therefore isn't okay for that team. And we'll be doing all the analysis, and then in December we'll be coming out with a kind of, okay, here are our principles of working for the council overall, and then within your teams, you've said you want to do these things, and this, this number of them are okay, and you can't do those for the following reasons. So in December, we'll sort of give people really a clear steer about how we're going to run the trial. So clearly, meeting deadlines is critical. I think people want this trial to work, and they know that if performance drops, the trial will have failed, and we won't be able to go any further. So I think people have a really big incentive to make sure that they are kind of maintaining performance. Now, on a kind of individual case-by-case basis, I couldn't necessarily say every deadline will be met, but broadly speaking, at a kind of performance level in terms of our KPIs, that's where we'll be measuring, are we maintaining performance? And it will be about doing things differently. So it may well be that, instead of a very long and very detailed report on something going to committee, we, say to colleagues, talk to the committee, talk to the chair, and try and get from them, what do they actually want from the report? Because it may be that you are spending 20% more of your time than you need to writing stuff that actually the committee isn't interested in. So it is about doing things differently, and I think people should expect to see a bit of change, and, I think that's a good thing. I think, trying to do the right thing first time is what we should all be doing. And I suppose this gives us more of an incentive to do that. I'm going to leave the question about risk to colleagues from the city, if that's okay, because that was their report. And then in terms of your last question, Councillor Bick, was around the shared waste service and how would that work? So yeah, it's a really interesting question. The more I talk to colleagues in waste, the more I think that there are ways that it could work, and that's why I think we should, with your council's agreement, definitely consider a trial in waste. I think in terms of equity, I think it's worth saying at the moment that, because the nature of the work is so different, it's quite hard to compare equity. So at the moment, our colleagues in waste go home when they finish their round. Now, it's really clear when you finished your round because you've collected all your bins. And so it's a very different sort of trial. So my colleagues in waste management tell me that there are ways that we could look at round reorganisation, which is something that most waste services do on a, probably somewhere between 5 and 10 year basis. It's a, significant thing to do. You need to get in some experts and run all of your rounds through a load of kind of very complex software, and it will come out with you could save this much time if you moved your rounds like this. And so that's something that you probably do, in my 14 years in local government, I think I've seen 2 round reorganisations. It's something that you do. Colleagues in Waste think that would assist in terms of running that data, but running it on the basis of if people were working a 4-day week. It would also save money, as I think I've mentioned previously, in terms of the 8 bank holidays that end up having to have overtime on the Saturday. Potentially it could save money in terms of reduced sickness, and our sickness rates in Waste are higher. You'd expect that in Waste because it's a much more physical job. And so, you'd expect people potentially to have more time off. And so, I think there are ways in which you probably could deliver a 4-day week in Waste without extra cost. I'm not making any sort of commitments or promises. I think it's something that we could do the analysis on, and then, if everybody says, right, this feels like we can proceed to a trial, then we should proceed to a trial. That would certainly be what I'd hope we would do.
Do you want to answer? Or...
Is that okay, Chair? There's a question, Councillor Bick, about risk, and I think what the paper's trying to say is that none of our staff it's actually South Cam's first public sector organisation in the UK. So they've got first mover advantage, learning about this, but also how to manage the risks. So the City Council being involved in the planning, City Council being involved through the shared service, and maybe Stephen Kelly, our Joint Director of Planning, might want to come in as well. But I think all of the risk, we get a lot of the benefit of learning about the insight, but we're not, as an organisation, South Cams have 472 members of staff taking part of it in the trial. Shared planning is around 130 odd people. So the risk for the City Council is substantially different than for South Cams, and that's all that sentence is saying. I think it's quite clear that we're not taking the same degree of risk as Liz and her colleagues are, being a kind of trailblazer on this.
Right, moving on. Councillor Sweeney next.
Thank you, Chair. I think that was very helpful, Robert, about the word risk, because I am very much in favour of a 4-day week. It is TUC and Labour policy. But rather than the trials and the good practice that we've seen maybe in the private sector, I do think that this feels very much like an experiment. And I think there are 2 very different words there, trial and experiment. I'm very concerned about work intensification. So workload is a big issue for public sector workloads. It's not just about the hours they work, but the type of work that they're doing within those hours, so whether they have autonomy to make decisions themselves. So work intensification is something that I'm very concerned about. And I'd like to know what consultations there have been with the recognised trade unions, particularly around workload, health and safety, and work intensification. And I think there have to be plans to ensure that if the experiment is successful, that all workers are able to take part in this. We're talking about shared waste, but they are the members of staff of the councils who have the most face-to-face contact with the public most of the time. And I think it's really important that we ensure that it is a physical job, it's a demanding job, there is increased sickness, and that intensification of workload is quite serious for those members of staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your questions, Councillor Sweeney. I mean, I'm not sure of the difference between a trial and an experiment. As I mentioned, when I got feedback from the academics in Boston and Cambridge, they felt that our trial was actually way more rigorous than the ones that they're running, and that's because it's had a lot of thought going into the planning of it. But I'm not kind of, I'm not pretending that it is very much an unknown, because we are the first public sector organisation to do this in the UK. Interestingly, we've been contacted by probably over a dozen councils now who are really interested in understanding and our learning and finding out more about how the trial goes. And so I think there's a really big appetite out there for by other councils to see if we can solve some of these intractable problems. I guess, you know, the question I ask myself is if we, you know, what else is there? When we look at the cost of agency staff, we look at turnover, we look at recruitment, we look at retention issues, we look at the fact that, you know, in the first quarter of this year, we could only fill 5 out of 10 vacancies. We have tried everything. And so in that sense, it felt like this is the next thing that we should try. I guess that's kind of where things sort of started. In terms of work intensification, I think that's a really, really good point. And the health and wellbeing survey that we've got has a lot of data on work and work intensification and how, you know, how people feel about their work. It's a survey that's been designed by a professor from Manchester University, and so it has a huge amount of data behind it. And I think we'll be able to measure that quite clearly. And you're right, you know, we do need to be careful that we don't, you know, maintain performance or possibly even improve performance, but find that everybody's health and well-being has decreased. You know, that would be a failure of a trial and we wouldn't continue. So the two things are very much in balance. But personally, I think I'm hearing a lot of colleagues saying that they found it quite liberating being able to think about how they can do things differently. And, you know, probably one of my best colleagues has said, actually feeling that I don't need to do a perfect piece of work has really, really enabled me to get more done. And I think that's a kind of classic sort of local government approach to work, you know, that we want everything to be perfect. We want, you know, when we come to committee or when we're presenting stuff in sort of public meetings, we want it all to be perfect. And actually, sometimes, you know, people can be way more productive if they get as far as good. I'm not saying, you know, good is always okay, but quite often good is okay. So I think what the announcement of the proposed trial has done is allow people to think about how they approach their work differently. So it's not just, it's not always about intensification, it's about doing things differently. In terms of consultation with the unions, yeah, we of course have spoken to the unions, and actually Unison are really, really keen to do some research with us, because as we have been approached by a number of councils, they have been approached by a number of reps from all over the UK asking about the learning. And so we're going to, Unison is in our project planning group, and we're going to be doing some case studies with them about the learning so that they can take that away into their sort of union environment as well. That all of the evidence shows that having the union on board is absolutely critical. I think, you know, having colleagues on board in terms of the people who the change affects and having the union on board are kind of the two key mistakes that organisations make when they implement this sort of trial. So luckily there is lots of learning about that we hopefully will avoid making those mistakes. And in terms of all workers should take part, including waste, I mean, I'm completely with you. I very much hope that, you know, your council will support a trial in waste, because I think it's really, really important that we do try waste as well.
I believe Stephen Kelly would like to make a contribution. Would you like to go ahead, Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. And partly building on Councillor Sweeney's questions and the comments of Councillor Beck, we in the shared planning service, I've spent the last 6 years trying to work out how to energise and think differently about delivering great outcomes for our communities. we have accumulated, and certainly in the last 12 months, with Katie and Councillor Thornborough, and Councillor Smith, we've been exploring ways in which we can energise that change journey for people and make it more engaging, partly because, as Councillor Sweeney highlights, people have been working really, really hard, and the prospect of further, the need for further efficiency and productivity gains is obviously quite a challenge. But being able to rethink the work that we do, rather than just think about how we can do the work that we've always done faster or quicker, has proven to be quite a stimulant to the team. And so, whilst initially myself, I did have some concerns or questions, thinking how are we going to fit our 5 days of really busy activity for 2 councils into 4. I suppose I also fell to the default position of assuming that we were going to do the same things in the same way, just faster or quicker. And so being able to and already receiving suggestions at a kind of unprecedented rate from across the planning team of things we might do differently if we were to proceed with this, I think has been quite interesting. In terms of the question about data, we've made remarkable steps forward in our performance and monitoring information. So I think if it's of help to the committee, we can certainly explain. We've got an amazing performance and information suite now. We can certainly explain what we're currently checking, what we're currently tracking, as a way of being able to reassure members, I hope, that if things start to go wrong, that if residents experience changes, we will know about that from the data that we collect. And it most certainly isn't our intention to adversely affect performance, but by thinking about some of the work that we do in a very different way, and the team are already starting to offer suggestions for ways which will improve residents' experience by reducing the delays and the waste and so on that they complain to you about as members, but also complain and have complained to me about over a number of years. So it's not going to be straightforward, but certainly from the shared planning's perspective, the feedback that I've had from the team, whilst people continue to be questioning and some are inevitably slightly worried, the conversations that we have had about what it forces us to do and the way it helps us to think differently have certainly been elicited some really powerful and interesting suggestions from the team. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Sweeney, did you want to come back? Okay, Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just pick up on, I was going to ask about which I think Stephen was just starting to touch on at the end there about the metrics for success. And I think I shared what seems to be the feeling in the room, that I'm very enthusiastic to see this going forward as a trial. It would be interesting to see the results, and if it has a benefit on productivity and health and wellbeing, then brilliant. Could whoever is the right person, just tell us a little bit more about what the health and wellbeing survey actually is? You say it's an industry-based service. But what actually is it? And I think it's quite difficult for us sitting here to scrutinise this, to get a sense of what will the benefits be without seeing what the kind of the now is. So I wonder whether it'd be possible to share the KPIs that are referred to in the reports, possibly with this committee, and then presumably the end result after the 3 months will also come back. So it'd be very helpful to have a concrete comparison, if that'd be possible, in terms of the impact on health and wellbeing, but also on key performance indicators. I wanted to ask you as well a little bit about the impacts on agency staff, to say that this trial doesn't apply to agency staff, and presumably you will still have some of those people working within the planning service. So I just wanted to ask how that is sort of envisaged to fit together, particularly in terms of supporting those people who might drop in and out when the full-time staff are now on down to 4 days, and just how will that work? And then finally, in terms of recruitment, which obviously is a key issue, and Liz, you said, what else can we try? I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about actually what has been tried, and I'm sure it's many things, but over the last few years, to try and drive up the enthusiasm. In particular, I work as a school as my day job, where I'm the careers lead, and we have people from all sorts of businesses coming forward to offer to come in or share resources with us and talk to people. And despite after doing that for 10 years in Cambridgeshire schools, I don't think I've ever had anything from either of our councils. So I'm sure there'll be places where possibly maybe it might be a way to move that forward by looking at schools in the area. I know Councillor Sweeney might have a similar interest in that vein. So I don't know whether you could just share a bit more about what you have tried so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. And if it's right, I may ask Stephen to add a bit of flavour around the recruitment because the planning issues are kind of quite specific. In terms of metrics for success, so there's basically two metrics. There's our standard suite of KPIs, which we report, as I'm sure you do, we report them to Scrutiny and Cabinet every quarter. Now, we're adding to those, so that we didn't have a huge amount of customer data there. The only one that was kind of a sort of a proxy for customer data really there was complaints. So we are now capturing, so we have customer data around the organisation, but it's not really captured systematically. So we've added, so we've got some customer data that we're measuring from October to December. Although in terms of the City Council, planning actually have been collecting customer data for, I'm wanting to say 6 months to a year in some granularity, and so we'll have a kind of better data set to compare there. In terms of the health and wellbeing survey, it's called Good Day at Work. It measures, it's an incredibly granular level survey which measures how people feel about their work and what's worrying them about work, what are the things that mean that they do not have a good day at work, and it measures and it's split into service by service and by a whole load of different kind of demographics as well, and then you can sort of bring it up to a whole organisation level. So happy to share the kind of before and after data from that survey because I think that would be really useful for everybody when they're looking at the results of the trial. And Chair, if I may just hand back to Stephen.
Stephen, do you want to?
Thank you. Yes, I mean I think in previous we've tried a whole suite of different initiatives, including LinkedIn programs. We have worked with schools, and in fact, our team talked to school children about some of our planning projects, but also have been at careers fairs, most recently the one in the Guildhall, I think, talking to 18-year-olds about pathways into planning. We've got a programme that we're working on with the RTPI about apprenticeships into planning. And we have also deployed market factor supplements, golden hellos, exit interviews, and so on. The interesting thing to note is actually the shared planning service is now quite effective at securing graduate planners, so that at this moment in time, we only have 3 agency staff in the development control team. All of the other posts are filled, bar we have a backlog team, which is a temporary team, which is deliberately focused on clearing the backlog. But it's not so much the numbers of agency staff, it's where those agency staff are. And where they are, and where it's very hard to hold on to people, is in the senior, principal and manager roles, which by association end up costing very substantially more than salaried staff to the organisation. And the point of the one of the, we think, interesting dynamics around retaining senior staff is both the flexibility. We know from staff surveys that staff, managers particularly, and more senior staff value the flexibility because they generally tend to be older. That's what experience comes with, but they also have more complex personal lives with family and caring responsibilities. So they value, and we have seen over the last 5 years, a significant increase in requests for flexible working already, and they value their time and the flexibility that the service provides. So those agency staff cost the council very significant sums of money. In some cases, a principal planning officer will cost the council possibly double, if not more than double, the salary of a permanent member of staff. And so the opportunity to offer something different to the private sector, not only the flexible working arrangements and the flexibility about work location, but also the most extraordinary diversity of work that they're going to get anywhere, and to be able to improve their work-life balance is quite a industry distinguishing feature that will be quite interesting to understand. We won't in 3 months understand, but understand what it can do in terms of improving the attractiveness of the location for work. So at this moment in time, we still, although we're doing very well in development management, we do struggle to recruit specialists. Our landscape architect post that as someone is retiring from, so they're not necessarily leaving, but they're retiring from, we have tried twice to advertise that post with no success. And it's because salaries are better in the private sector and benefits may well be better. But I think we have an opportunity now to put a different proposition rather than just pay to people, which I think will be interesting to see how it reacts in the marketplace. But we have tried a range of measures. We're very good at junior staff. It's actually the senior staff that are the cornerstone of our successful success in the planning service. And the pathways, we obviously want to convert junior staff to senior staff, but we lose people on that journey as they get experience with us. And we hope to see whether or not our ability to retain people improves as a consequence of the trial. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to come back, Councillor Payne? Councillor Smart.
Thanks for letting me speak again, Chair. So I just want to refer to something that was said previously, but before that, I just want to touch briefly on why we have shared services for residents that are listening to the committee. I mean, planning maybe isn't the best example to give an example from, so I'll refer to the bin lorries. So, you know, basically the bin lorries used to collect at one end of the street for South Cambs and the other end of the street for Cambridge, and, you know, it means 2 lorries going to the same street around the border between South Cambs and Cambridge. Now, it makes a lot of sense to have a shared service and make it much more efficient, and that makes sense to everybody, and there's lots more detail in terms of making that work. So it's a good thing to have shared services. In terms of the failure of process, which I wanted to refer to, so Liz has apologised for that, and thank you for that, and she's carrying the can here. But by the way, we haven't heard anything from the leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council, Bridget Smith. That's neither at the briefing nor today nor any other time as far as I'm concerned. And surely she's the one in charge. And through you, Chair, so Councillor Bick has pointed the finger of blame at Cambridge. He's blaming us for these actions. He said we are not assertive. So in this administration, we believe in cooperative working, in partnership. But as the Chair has said, this action has put those partnerships at risk. So my question to the Chief Executive is, that's our Chief Executive, is does he feel that we are not assertive, or does he feel like me that the blame game is not useful here?
Would you like to answer that one?
Sure, thank you, Chair. Say if you look at the paper, Councillor Smart, it's very clear there are some recommendations in there to support partnership working. You know, Liz is here. I think I can't comment on relationship between members, but I know that we do talk regularly to members and leaders in South Cambridgeshire District Council But at a working level, we get on really well, and there's a very strong sense of partnership and cooperation and mutuality. I think this was quite an unusual set of circumstances, and Liz has told you around some of the reasons why she felt she wasn't able to talk openly about the plans for a trial. So it's a plan for a trial, and partly that's around establishing good data as the first organisation in the UK to trial something that actually would be somewhat revolutionary, and could actually, we could learn a lot from. So I appreciate your points about whether we're assertive or not. I certainly think that we're assertive when we need to be, and we listen when we need to be, and Liz will be assertive when she's sticking up for her residents and members. But overall, I think it works well.
Councillor Simon Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I cannot say I'm satisfied. Well, we've received a satisfactory explanation for why this council was not informed about this initiative. I can understand that there was a need for a degree of confidentiality for purposes of the data collecting exercise. But once that was finished, then I don't see there was any reason why then this council should not be informed. And I'm very embarrassed for Robert. He was put in an invidious position. I think he dealt with it with great integrity and professionalism, but I do wish he hadn't have been put in that place. I just want to come back to the overall concept proposal, and I welcome it. I think that we have been dogged in this country by the culture of being in attendance but not working. I've worked in local government for 25 years, and I've observed that in different local authorities. And a former colleague of Mike Davey and Councillor Herbert was asked when he's the chief executive of another authority. He was asked how many people work in County Hall, and he said about half of them. He got into trouble for that, but it was quite a telling comment. And the reason is that the hours have just been too long. And I think with a shorter working week, I agree that with the comments that have been made by Stephen Kelly. It's an incentive to rethink the work that the officers do, and they are focused on the important high added value activities, and they can get rid of the make work activities that kind of can be quite prevalent. However, on the manual side, on the shared waste side, I think it is stretching a point that you can approach emptying a bin in a more focused, doing it differently way. It's emptying as a bin is emptying a bin, and it's still 127,000 bins a week to be emptied. So I'm think that there should have been the two things, the officer and the manual worker should have been treated in exactly the same way, given the parity of esteem. I think that differentiation was extremely unfortunate and does show a degree of disrespect to the manual workers. I think that needs to be put right. But I also think that we have to be very, very cautious about an expectation that the manual workers can do 127,000 bins in a week on a 30-hour. I see the bin, the waste personnel going past my house every week, and I can tell you they are running and emptying the bins. It is very, very hard work, and I admire what they do, and I don't really think we should be asking them to go faster. They otherwise we're still at high levels of sickness rates and absenteeism and all the rest of it than we are now. Thank you.
Go ahead and respond, please.
Happy to. Thank you, Chair. So you are absolutely right that you can't empty bins faster than people empty them at the moment, and nobody's saying that that's possible. What we are saying, and I'd refer you back to Councillor Smart, is that there are different ways of routing bin rounds. You know, Councillor Smart made the very good point that when we didn't have a shared service, bin rounds were inefficient because they stopped at borders. And so in the same sort of way, you can reorganise rounds to become more efficient. We know that's true. We know because I'm quite sure City will have done it in the past before the shared service. We certainly would have done it at the implementation of the shared service, and we can do it again. So we know that we can make things more efficient, not by making people run faster or, you know, change individual behaviour, and I was never suggesting that. I think I'd take issue with showing disrespect to manual workers. Actually, I was at the depot on the day we made the announcement and did 3 staff briefings with my colleagues at the depot, and was really clear with them that this was a really big deal for the council, and that we were not able to do everything at once, and that because there was so much more potential in terms of desk-based workers to change the way that people work in a way that was the more complex trial, and therefore that was the trial that we chose to go first. We could have gone the other way around, but I don't accept that it shows a disrespect to our colleagues in the depot. I tried very, very hard to be very respectful to them, and the feedback I got from them was that they were really grateful that I went and briefed, and they were very excited about the prospect of a trial. And, you know, I certainly hope that we will be able to proceed with that trial.
I have Councillor Anna Smith wishes to make a contribution. Can you join us,
I'm
Anna?
coming in from the screen. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Great. So Councillor Sweeney raised some really important points, and I do want to start by endorsing those. Like her, and I think like many in the room, I'm broadly in support of the principle of a 4-day week. It's Labour policy, it's TUC policy, though with some differences to what's set out here. I'm really glad to hear it reinforced that unions will be fully and properly involved in this. Our unions are excellent, and they're there in part to represent the views of their members, and they're going to be invaluable in this. So I'm really glad to hear there will be that discussion, and we will be asking and discussing what discussions have taken place, what learning has come from the unions, how we're acting on that, and that's a really important part of what we want to see. I think there's a reasonable level of agreement from ourselves and from Councillor Bick that it's very important that we grapple with the question of how we involve non-office staff in this. So again, I'm really glad to hear some of the reassurances this evening, because like Councillor Bick, I do have a concern about having some staff enjoy the benefits that will come with a 4-day week, whilst other staff are simply working the same patterns as before and not taking those same benefits. I'm just going to plug myself in, by the way. I've just seen how low my battery's gone. There we are, that's better. This is a really interesting experience being in this committee right now, because normally I'm here listening to the discussion of a paper that I've been working on with officers and with members potentially for months. And this time it's to discuss an initiative that I didn't even know was in the pipeline. And members have already discussed that concern in detail. I'm not going to repeat those concerns now, but I think we do need to look more broadly at how our shared services system works, and that it's really robust in the way we communicate, and we dig into the practicalities of how we get that communication more robust, more effective in the future. That's really vital. In terms of this 4-day week process, we've now got one of our shared services teams, if this vote is passed this evening, going to be part of that. So I'd like to know from Liz what reassurances you can give, Liz, that we are going to be fully informed in that monitoring, in that planning, in that decision making as equal partners, because these are services that our city really relies upon. So everyone in the city is going to want to have that reassurance that we are going to be very involved in that process.
Are you able to answer? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Smith. Noting your comments, which didn't require answers, in terms of reassurance about monitoring, I think it's all set out in the paper, but basically everything that will be monitored via South Cambridgeshire's members and officers will have the same monitoring in the city. So I will be, the proposal is that I bring back reports on progress to this committee, that the portfolio holder for planning will be closely involved, that, as I said, my colleague Deborah Simpson will be on the project management group, that the union, who, our union rep is the same rep, and so she'll be both on the project management group and also will be sharing the learning through Unison. And so I'm sort of hopeful that exactly the reassurances that I can give to South Cams, I can give to the city as well. If there's anything else that you'd suggest that you'd like, I'm more than happy to, provide more information, do it in a different way, provide more briefings. It's always a pleasure to come to your chamber. But if you'd like me to brief online, then, I'm really at your disposal.
Right. Councillor David, do you want to speak now, or we take the recommendations?
Well, I've got a question, I've got to be honest. Councillor Anna Smith and Councillor Sweeney have both made reference in passing. I was with the unions today, and I think they'd like more and better negotiation. They were both concerned that they perhaps hadn't been as involved as they would like to be, and it would only be appropriate for me to share that, given the discussions we've had today. My question, I suppose, again, I'd like Anna to differentiate between the principle of what we're proposing, which I fully support. As Anna said, it's TUC policy, it's Labour Party policy, so that's not going to be an issue for us, and I look forward with intrigue as to how the experiment takes place, and I think quite rightly we've focused upon the HR issues today. My issue is about governance, Liz. Clearly there's a failure of governance here in my view. I'm delighted that you've taken academic advice, but I think it might have been better spent or District Council had talked to at greater length to both the members and the officers. I think it could have been done in a way that was discreet without breaching any sort of trust or decision that you wish to take forward. So bringing that all forward, I know there is a governance review taking place, and I think that's being led by your Chief Executive Officer. It would be great if that could be concluded and brought before Civic Affairs sometime around Christmas time, because then we'd be able to have an appropriate level of review of this, going through the appropriate governance procedures in the future, which would then avoid the sort of problems we've had to get round in relation to this particular issue, which again I come back to, I'm fully supportive of. So it's a really odd position to be in. It's the governance that needs strengthening, and therefore I would look forward to receiving that report accordingly. Thank you, Liz.
Wish to add to that?
If I may. Chair. So thank you for that feedback on the unions. Well, I think that the conversations that I've had, and I've had 2 conversations in the last week, have been, so partly regional Unison are incredibly keen to get the learning. Locally, you're right, there is concern, and that's why I think it's really important that the union is on the project team and able to represent the views of their members, because it's critical that people's concerns can be raised. And there is absolutely no point sort of brushing concerns under the carpet, because what will happen is that the trial won't go well, and that's not in anybody's interest. So thank you for that feedback, and I think I'm meeting them again this week. In terms of the governance, happy to, it's my Chief Operating Officer, Anne Ainsworth, and I'll certainly talk to her and see, I'm not cited on everything in terms of the process of what's going on there, but I'll ask her about bringing something back to your Civic Affairs Committee before Christmas.
I think the word drafts, I looked at Fiona, but there were drafts ready in June, but were never approved. And I think it would just be a question of getting those through the appropriate bodies. Thank you very much.
Robert, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I think just reflecting on this conversation, there seems to be broad support for the principle, but we can learn about the process. And I think what's really important, and we should recognise, is the strength of the partnership means that we can have this open conversation in a public forum. And Liz is here she's apologised in all member briefings. We've talked in more detail in private forums. She's here again, setting out the rationale. But the good thing is that where you've got a strong partnership and you can recognise where you've made a mistake, you can move on and make a stronger partnership. So I wouldn't want that to get lost tonight. That's really important to remember. There are many councils that work together, share services, and they can't have this level of openness, transparency and trust. And in the end, it all does come down to trust. And I appreciate that several members have raised the issue about trust. And I think there's a recognition in the paper, in the recommendations, to build on this, to learn from this, and to strengthen our governance arrangements in future so that you can have greater confidence in any changes that come down the line, not coming out of the blue. But just like to thank Liz for coming tonight and answering your questions.
Thank you. Well, we've had a really good debate on that. It's a very important issue to us, as you will understand. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one very quick point, which is I have been slightly disappointed tonight in that we've had more debate on the governance process and on what Liz is actually trying to do. I think we do owe Liz a great vote of thanks because she hasn't sat on her hands and done nothing about the huge recruitment challenge that she and other businesses in the London Donuts are facing right across the board, and that she has tried to find a solution. And I salute that and welcome that, and I'd like to thank Liz. Thank you.
Councillor Anna Smith, do you want to make a further contribution?
Yeah, it was just very short, but I'm aware that this is a debate that a lot of people are very interested in. I suspect a lot of people are watching online. It's been quite a long discussion, and Liz, I do want to thank you for the level of detail that you've brought us, and also Stephen as well. Thank you for talking us through some of the practicalities here, because this is an important thing for us to get right, and it's incredibly helpful for us to have people coming in to do that. So Liz, particularly, thanks for coming in as a kind of guest speaker in this. I found that very helpful to hear what you have to say.
Right, thank you. And I think we have concluded the debate. So can I take you to the recommendations on page 175 and 6? Some important ones there, particularly number 2. So can I see all those in favour of those recommendations? Unanimous. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Councillor Davey.
Delighted to accept, and can I also say thank you to Liz for coming. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Right, we now move to the last item on the agenda, which is item 10. And firstly, we need to have a public question read out from Anthony Carbon.
Yep.
Could you do that?
Yes, I'll do that, Chair. Okay, so this is a question we've received from Mr. Anthony Carpen about this report before you. Re-item 10 of the agenda on future office accommodation. What assessment has the council made of high-profile fundraising from Cambridge's philanthropists and wealthy residents, past and present, regarding a revamp of the Guildhall? Please could you direct officers to incorporate an assessment of the likely costs and benefits of employing a fundraising officer to help raise some of the large sums needed to renovate the Guildhall so as to make it suitable for the 21st century, including, but not limited to, A, raising the council chamber up 2 levels to create a new state-of-the-art lecture theatre in the void to rent out to the private sector, B, renovating the large hall from 1862 to improve access and acoustics to make it more suitable as a venue for large exercise-related evening classes, and C, creating a rooftop cafe, giving splendid views of the city and enabling the council to charge upmarket tourist market rates for the beverages, knowing many will pay to enjoy the view. Noting there's always the option of a discount for residents similar to the old City Council leisure cards.
Thank you. Anthony Carpen could not be with us, but thank you for reading that out.
Do you want me to answer that now, or does that come later?
I just add it into the debate, I think.
Are you sure?
Well, you can answer it now if you wish. Yeah.
Okay. I just don't know how else I'll respond to it, Chair, other than because of specific questions there. I don't know. It's your call.
Well, I suggest you to consider them in along with everything else that comes up and ask them at the end. They're contributions to a debate, some ideas, that's all they are. He's asking specifically about whether we would employ a fundraiser we may have considered.
Which I'm still not sure. Do you want me to answer the question now, or do you want me to wait until the end when I'm happy to do it either way? It's your
At the end, please. Okay. Right, now, Dave Prinsep, you're going to present this report to us, I believe.
I'm Dave Prinsep. I'm the Head of Property Services for the City Council. This report outlines a review of the Council's current use of its office accommodation. It's looked at how much space we currently have, how well utilised it is, how it performs in areas such as building condition, environmental performance. It also links with the earlier report on business transformation, and that piece of work being undertaken, as that will inform what the Council will look like in the future, and also any associated property needs arising from that. Post-COVID, we work very differently as an organisation, as staff. It's significantly different from what it was prior to COVID. We have started moving towards more flexible ways of working prior to COVID, but this has certainly accelerated that change. What is clear is a significant over-provision of office accommodation at present, and that's not likely to change in the future. We are seeing some more staff coming back into the office, but not in significant numbers compared to pre-COVID. The changes we have give opportunity to consider how we work, how much space we need, and improve the buildings in areas of accessibility, customer service, condition, environmental performance for buildings. Also gives opportunities to look at savings, potential capital receipts, new income streams, and thinking about how we can use our assets to meet our wider objectives, and also contribute more widely to the economy of the city centre. In the report, we've set a range of options that we considered at a high level in 1.9, and I think probably those are the options that most people would expect us to consider doing a review of this nature. We reviewed the options with executive councillors and discussed which options we felt most appropriate for bringing forward more detailed work and to develop into a more in-depth business case rather than doing in-depth work in each of those options. 2.2 sets out the recommendations in respect to those options, and what is proposed to be taken forward is a focus on retaining the Guildhall as the main office and civic space in the city centre, but also considering for comparison purposes alternative city centre office and civic space. One thing we have done as we come out of COVID, we've obviously had a lot of surplus space, and we've looked at how we can use that space. So, for example, at Mandela House, we share space with the Greater Cambridge Partnership. That's been very successful and has worked well with the integrator within the office there, and also improving those interactions with our own staff. And then more recently, we've just completed a lease of a ground floor Guildhall to an organisation called Alia. Alia is a local organisation, and many of you will know them. They provide accommodation and support to small businesses, social enterprise and charities. They've got several tenants already in the Guildhall and ground floor. They hope to get more fairly soon, and also they're looking to let the shop and cafe in the near future and make some of the former tourist information centre space available for community and cultural organisations. So I think the report represents an opportunity to see significant change in our office accommodation and how we all work, but also quite exciting opportunities for how we use our assets more widely to meet the wider objectives of the council and support the city centre. So hopefully the report is self-explanatory. Any questions?
Now, before we take questions, you will all be aware that there is an Appendix C which contains confidential items which we should not make public. I would hope that we could have a good debate before. If you want to discuss the confidential items, we can do, but I'd rather have a good debate before we get on to that element. So, are you willing to go ahead with that on that basis? Yes, okay. Right, so questions which are not related to Appendix C, can I have those now, please? Councillor Vick.
Mr. Chair, from this side, I'd like to welcome the report. I think we've carried on for quite a long time with two large buildings in the centre of the city resembling the Marie Celeste, and I think that it's time to bring that down to one. I think there's obviously an opportunity to earn income, gain a receipt, and reduce operational costs, and we should certainly do that. I mean, it's depressing as a workplace to be in when these places are half empty, and it's also wasteful. So, this report comes a moment, not a moment too late. The point I want to make is, though, which one should be our base, or should it be another one? My belief is that there is a very important issue, which is maybe a little bit more than about the building, the fabric of different buildings, but it's about place. And that is not a word mentioned much in the report, but I think it is important when we confront these sort of decisions. For me, we're the representative body of local government in the city. We should be central to how the city is led, and there does need to be a sort of physical and visible representation of that in our city, and for me that is what a centre is really about. I think we should be proud of that, and I think that we should want to continue with a place on the market square in Cambridge. I mean, it's a few weeks ago that we had the proclamation of the new king. I mean, you don't have to be a royalist to understand that the place that is the Guildhall gave rise to people coming together, and if the activities related to the monarch don't impress you, then I think it's also about political protest as well, and people come together for that, and I think it's important that we provide that political, that public representational spot in the middle of the city. But I also think it's about place in the sense that the city itself, the city centre itself, benefits from not being 100% commercial and mercantilist, that it does have people who come here as a place to work in offices, and I think actually that helps our businesses as well as anything else. And I strongly believe that what is proposed here is stage one of a good decision. Obviously, it doesn't take us the whole of the way, and I am a bit mystified by what this other third option is. I mean, do we know of the place that is the comparator that is spoken of in the report? And if so, what is it? Because it would be useful to know. And I gather we're talking about the next stage only taking about 6 months, so it sort of presupposes that we already know of something. And I think it's fair to say it if we do. I also want to say that I've had numerous conversations about the Guildhall with lots of officers in the past, and it seemed to me that there's been an unnecessarily rigidly sacrosanct view of what can happen in a listed building. I don't think that if we end up with this building, we should begrudge the people using it, the staff primarily, modern working functional conditions. And I believe that the best guarantor of the conservation interest is actually having an effective functional use for a building like this. And I think that we should find it possible to allow the interior of the building to be made more habitable and more functional and a modern working environment for people using it. And I think that we should challenge an overly pure view about the conservation interest, which I think is simply untenable in the days of needing to mitigate against climate change, for example. So I build that into my view of this, and I would like to welcome the report. And there is a question there which I hope could get an answer, please.
Would you like to try and answer that?
There's no defined comparator. We've had various buildings over the past few years we've considered and thought about that may be suitable, and there will be some in the market as well. So what we will do is look at what that comparator could be. There may be some that we think are more suitable than others, but certainly in terms of cost comparison, those sort of things, that is what we'll be looking for from that comparator. In relation to the building itself, we've had conversation with the conservation team. We'll continue to do that to see what are the key aspects of the building that are fundamentally unchangeable, and those things that can be used to improve the use of the building, make it a more acceptable place for staff to work in, for customers to access the building as well. So we are having those conversations, and we think that we can make a good use of the building and make it fit for purpose as part of that process. All those things will come at a cost, but wherever we go, we'll have to incur costs in getting the building fit for purpose anyway.
Councillor Bennett?
Mr. Chair, I'm afraid I'm going to speak for quite a long time. I'll try to make it as concise as possible. Point one is if there's going to be any disposal of a city centre building, I would like that disposal, whether by way of leasehold or freehold, to be subject to robust no embarrassment clauses. I'm really disappointed that the option of disposing of the Guildhall is off the table, given its higher value, lesser suitability as an office building, and particularly considering the council's current financial situation. And that seems to be a contradiction with what's in 3.2 and 3.3 of the report. I would also put it on the table that the sentimental attachment of councillors to the Guildhall may be rather greater than that of the public at large. And the public may just simply prefer us to do a job, maintain services as much as possible, which would be much easier for financial contribution from a disposal or partial disposal of a higher value building, which is the Guildhall. Thank you.
Any questions there you want to answer? Or statements, really?
Could I just answer the question about any disposal of any buildings? certainly what we would do is come back with the final report and make recommendations as to how that was going to be dealt with. So it could be leasehold or freehold, whatever we choose to do. But we'd obviously have to consider any conditions we might want to impose as part of that process. So that is something we'd come back with as a final report and make those recommendations. In respect of the disposal of the Guildhall, obviously there's factors other than just financial that people have interest in this particular building in terms of the civic history of the site and the building itself and the significance that plays, and that is a balance for people to consider and weigh up before deciding what direction we're going.
Right, coming back. Anybody else want questions? Councillor Davey.
Sorry, it's more a comment at the end. If that's required, I wasn't sure if anybody else is asking any more questions, because if they're not, then I will say I'll wait.
Okay, so Councillor Anna Smith, you want to contribute?
Yeah, thank you. There's quite... oh, I can hear myself coming back. That's slightly unsettling. There's a lot that I welcome here in this report, and I want to thank the team for bringing it. I welcome an understanding that many of our officers do not need to be in a building, in a set room, at a set desk to do their job. And I think that's a real sign of respect of our staff's professionalism. And I think there's also a great commitment there to supporting more flexible and environmentally friendly working. I think that's also really important. I really welcome and thank the officers for the work they've done to scope the various options, and I know this isn't the end of the process. There's a lot more work they need to do, and I want to thank them for that. And I also wanted to draw the committee's attention to the focus that we can see here on using our assets in the most productive way, because they're there to support our communities, and we can see a focus on using our assets in a way that's not being wasteful, or a way of using our assets to help our city, as we're currently seeing on the ground floor of the building that most people are in right now, in the work with Alia. And I really welcome that recommendation that we keep the Guildhall as a focus. I'm getting a little bit concerned about the outbreak of consensus this evening, but I absolutely do agree with Councillor Bick that the death of the late Queen and the proclamation of the accession of King Charles really emphasise the way in which people's focus for important events is the market square and those civic buildings. And as one of our groups said, these are not our personal buildings. We hold them in trust for future generations, and that's such an important thing. In reference to Councillor Bennett's comment about not having emotional attachment, I think it's a lot more than that, and I would point to two things. First of all, think of Swansea, which left its old Guildhall buildings, I believe, in the 1980s. To move to a lovely new civic centre that was going to be the answer to everything. And I read in the paper now they're moving back to the old Guildhall again because the lovely new civic centre turned out not to really be fit for purpose after all. And I'm also think very closely about what's happened around where our current Guildhall is, that there are beautiful streets and houses that no longer exist because of the lure of the shiny in building petty curie. And I think it's very easy sometimes to go for the new and to forget our attachment, why these buildings have been made in such a powerful and useful way to support civic purposes. So I really welcome that recommendation. We keep the Guildhall as the focus, and I know it's just the start of the process, but I look forward to engaging in that process as we work through the ideas and proposals in the coming months and years.
I'll add my own contribution that I entirely agree that this building is the focus for the citizens of Cambridge. When things need to bring people together, they come here, come outside here, come inside here. It's a fact. If we sold the building or we retain it, either way, the building has to be improved in its insulation for global climate change reasons. And I think the council is probably in a better place to make sure it is renovated tastefully, in tune with its listed status as much as possible, but making sure it's effectively much more efficient as an energy building in the future. So I certainly welcome the proposal to retain the Guildhall, and we will look at the alternative, but I suspect that the Guildhall will be where we ought to be and where our citizens expect us to be. So we will go ahead with that, in my view. Any further contributions from anybody or questions? Okay, well, in that case, nobody wants to... Yes, sorry, Councillor Davies.
That's possible before the recommendation is accepted. There's one or two comments I would like to make, Chair, if that's possible. First of all, is to say thank you particularly to Dave, Princep and Fiona for their work on this. When we asked them earlier in the year to do a basic cost analysis of what was going on, it was really important to us to be able to make that decision, both here and elsewhere, with regards to what was best. And I think what came out of this echoes probably Councillor Bick and Councillor Anna Smith's comments, that it's very difficult to quantify a cost on civic value. It's very difficult to therefore place some sort of financial value on what is the most significant building within the Market Square and within the centre of Cambridge. It's the points that Councillor Robertson has just made. People come. The Queen's death and the King's accession clearly demonstrated that. If I can pick up Anthony Carpen's comments at this point, if that's okay, Chair. As Anthony will now be aware, the recommendation, subject of course to the vote, is that we do keep and retain the Guildhall and to invest in it and to take steps accordingly. As a keen observer both of the buildings of the city and also his interest in local democracy, it's only right that we give due attention to Anthony's question. Philanthropy is an interesting suggestion, I think. I'm particularly interested in seeing what Camden have done in their rebuild of their centre, which is, as people might know, opposite St Pancras Station. So it's not an inexpensive place to do a complete rebuild. And I'll be intrigued to see what and how they financed that, because I suspect it came from financiers beyond just the normal. If not, then we can certainly explore philanthropists, but I suspect it's more likely we will get funds from elsewhere. In terms of the three specifics, clearly in terms of the council chamber that Anthony reflects upon, it's a listed building, but it hints upon Councillor Bick's comments. It's very important that we have and ensure that there's appropriate accessibility and technology, because what's currently in place is not appropriate. I think we're particularly interested in how we use the small and large halls, because clearly if we get that right in any planning process that take place, there could be a potential source of income, which would link, again, how we're seeking to use the building. The announcements in relation to our relationship with Alia, which is now going forward, I think is a very good example of how we can work with the community and to work with those who wish to start up from the community and demonstrate our commitment to the city is a good indication of what we might want to achieve in the long term with regards to this building. Finally, and more perhaps ambitiously, Anthony's suggestions about how we might use the fourth floor are interesting. I know Dave has looked at the potential for how we might open up the roof in the past, and clearly that could be quite a spectacular potential, and we will take on board comments. It's fairly clear that as this decision is announced, we're going to get ideas for how we use the Guildhall from a variety of sources, not least within this building itself, but obviously from the public as well. These are welcomed, but I think it would only be fair to say, please bear in mind that Dave and Fiona have very big jobs already, and how we manage that process will be vital. What is key, though, is we have to get the communications done properly and effectively, and there's lessons we could probably learn from other initiatives that have taken place elsewhere. So to conclude, briefly, I think what we'll now take forward is the work that's been proposed within the excellent report, and take forward an option based around maintaining and investing in the future of the Guildhall. And again, I'd like to thank Dave and Fiona for their work on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further comments, contributions, questions? No? All right, I'll take you to the recommendations on page 152. To note, to approve, and to request a further report. Can I take them all together? Yes, all right. All those in favour of those three recommendations, please show. 7. Those against?
That's one.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Do you accept those recommendations?
This was what I'm delighted to accept. Thank you very much, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, and thank everybody else. It's a very late meeting again. It's important business. So thank you very much. Good night and good travel home.